And we are rolling on Wednesday, June 13th, 2018. It's a really sunny day in Los Angeles here at UCLA, where we're speaking to a very elite group of young men and women who, of course, rushed to this classroom to be on time and probably didn't notice the beautiful shrubbery that dots our campus. And I hope after this exam you'll notice the beautiful campus we have. So that we're all in the same space, and this will help you remember what I'm looking for. I want to review the prompt. You're going to deliver a 4 to 5 minute speech. Do I have a timer? Pretty. Give it to me loud, and I need to hear it orally counted down, okay? Students will be graded on their thoughtful analysis and their oral presentation. Please read and incorporate the article on Teaching to be Critical by John Passmore before you begin this assignment. Attendance is absolutely mandatory, and it looks like everyone has come. The written component. In a thoughtful, descriptive essay, please discuss the following topics. What did you learn? What do you now know? Describe how your BS detector has evolved over the course of the quarter. Most importantly, how can we continue to expand the use of our BS detector as we leave this class? Because I'm not going to be around to harangue you to think critically about the evidence and the BS that's flying into our ears from various crummy sources. I also ask that you look at 2 sources that present the crap test. So kudos for anybody that mentioned any ideas that they were able to incorporate from the crap test. I then say include examples from class, from everyday life. Also include examples from your journal and from the textbook. For example, authorities as barriers to robust critical thinking, i.e., what was demonstrated in the Milgram experiment, where people were willing to inflict pain. Who are the authorities in your life that are causing you not to think critically? The essay should adhere to the following guidelines: 12-point font, Times New Roman, 1-inch margin on all sides, maximum of 5 pages. Use Chicago manual style, and that means the footnote is at the bottom of each page, as I've said before. And I gave you a citation where you can use it. As I said before, it's very simple on Word. Just click Chicago and it does it for you. On the oral component, you will deliver a 4 to 5 minute speech on what is written. The speech should not be read, hopefully not read, but delivered extemporaneously is what I'm hoping for. Use storytelling to illustrate your main points. And I gave you the format that I gave you in your last presentation that you saw beautifully illustrated. She was here today, yes, by this young lady here. And where you have an introduction, a thesis, a significant statement, and in the main body is where you answer all the questions that I ask you to address. You summarize, conclude, and tie that do all that in 5 minutes. I'll ask you a couple of quick questions, and we'll live happily ever after. Now, someone asked me, can I leave after I give my speech? My answer is, it's a free country. People are dying in Syria and Iraq, so you can walk out. But I think it's classless. I think it's rude. I think you should stay and hear your fellow classmates. But, you know, like I said, it's a free country. So, do your thing. Okay? So, that's the dealio. Any questions about the Quran? No. Good. Okay, so we'll have, for the first 5 standing on the wall, Kimberly, Haley, Tricia, Harnett, Imani, and William. Are we missing Kimberly? Is Kimberly in the house? No Kimberly? Great, 0. Excellent. Okay, then the first opening will be from Haley. Your copy that you hand to me. Thank you. Yes, good. Okay, give me a moment. And so back up just a touch. Stay right there. Don't go past that gray box to the front. Don't go too back. Right there is good. Yeah, I'm happy. Shh. Silence. Let me get a little more. Oh, can you get your hair out? You have a bungee cord or something you can put around your hair? Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, just put it behind your ears. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Wait a minute. Your face is dark. I gotta lighten it up. Just a minute. Ooh. Ooh, yeah. Okay. And we are rolling on the final exam of Haley on the notion of critical thinking.
In his book, Letters to a Young Contrarian, Christopher Hitchens states that the essence of the independent mind is not what it thinks, but how it thinks. Many people are deterred by debate because they don't want to have to argue a side that they disagree with. But I would argue that critical thinking skills that are developed through debate are essential in order to learn how to think and how to avoid certain biases that we hold. So this competitive debate format encourages people to seriously consider arguments that they may normally shut out, which is extremely important. And this is important and significant for you guys because as you go throughout your lives, you're going to have to deal with authority figures, and you're going to have to deal with other points of view and learn how to think for yourself and do your own research. So today I'm going to discuss 3 points: what I've learned about critical thinking, what we know now, and then how my BS detector has expanded throughout this process. So to begin with what I have learned about critical thinking. Critical thinking is a mental process of evaluating an issue objectively. So what this means is taking every argument at its best. So even if you disagree with something, you should still argue it to the fullest extent and do your research on it so that you can present it well. I've learned that doing your own research is valuable because issues are not as simple as some people would like you to believe they are. For example, I was assigned to argue against the motion that the United States should ban fracking. My whole life since I was in AP Environmental in high school, I have learned that fracking is a bad thing, which is why I didn't at first want to argue for it. However, after doing my own research, I learned that there actually are many advantages and ways to resolve issues. According to John Passamore on In Teaching to Be Critical, thinking critically can sometimes cause discomfort, and that it does take quite a bit of courage to go against what a lot of people are saying. So even though everyone in this class may have, at the beginning of that debate, thought that we were on the losing side or the bad side, after doing my own research and presenting those sides effectively, I think I represented them very well. So my second point is what we know now. Ultimately, after participating in 2 debates myself and then watching so many others throughout this quarter, I have learned that climate change is not as certain as I thought. I have learned that issues are not as simple as they seem and that the bad side isn't always as bad as certain sides would like you to believe. For example, I would have believed someone if they told me that politicizing science is a good thing. However, after further inspection, watching the debate, I learned for myself that I actually think that it has a lot of disadvantages. My third point is how my BS detector has evolved and expanded. In the beginning of this quarter, we were introduced to this BS detector, which definitely changed the way I think about sources. I saw people in debates actually looking up other people's sources before the debate to see how credible they were, which changed the way I looked up my sources because I knew that I would probably be tested on them by my opponents. So I actually, in our debate, looked up my opponents' sources, and I found that one of their sources was only evaluating one model instead of multiple models, and I brought that to the attention of the audience during my debate. I plan to expand my BS detector by incorporating these skills that I have learned into other areas of my life. For example, on the British parliamentary debate circuit, I've realized that there's kind of this pattern where people don't use sources. And it's just kind of become acceptable to not back up your claims with any evidence. And I'll admit that I fall victim to that a lot, where I'll just make claims and not have any sources to back it up. So I plan to try to do more research and incorporate sources and question other people's sources in my debate career. So to summarize, I've discussed what I've learned about critical thinking, what I know after watching debates, and how my BS detector has evolved and expanded. In conclusion, it is vital that we continue to question the validity of claims so we don't fall victim to echo chambers. Authors like Passamore and Hitchens note that going against norms can be uncomfortable and that it takes courage, but it's important to argue against widely held beliefs. I really do believe the quote that I began with by Christopher Hitchens: "The essence of independence is how the mind thinks." Many people mischaracterize debate as very negative activity, but I would argue that being in debate has made me a very open-minded person because it forced me to really consider other views.
Thank you very much. Stay up for your question. Very nicely done, Haley. I want to ask one question, which was on the Milgram issue. How did you factor that into your overall schema of things?
So I think with the Milgram issue, it's just with authority figures throughout my life. I talked about how teachers in high school definitely made me feel like climate change was a set in stone thing. But I think I've learned through this that doing your own research is the most important thing, not just accepting claims because the person who's telling them to you seems credible.
Great. Thank you so much. Very nice. Let's give her a round of applause. Okay, the next person on the list is Trisha. Trisha Bautista. Oh, don't call you Trisha. Trish. Get rid of that A. Trish. Okay, Trish, rock and roll.
It's really zoomed in, Professor.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I can back up just a touch. Can you back up one more touch? Yeah. Oh, perfect. Yeah. Okay. Can you back up? There, right there. Perfect. Okay. Rock and roll.
Okay. So when I first signed up for this class, I didn't really think much of it. Because in the past, my classes really, I didn't do anything too involved. I just sat there, absorbed what I needed to for my midterm and final, took my grade and left. But I couldn't have been more wrong about this class. So when I first learned that we had to do 3 speeches, including a debate, I was initially intimidated, to be honest. But I thought, this being my last quarter at UCLA, it would be a great opportunity for me to improve my public speaking skills and my oral storytelling. And little did I know I would gain much more, like knowing when and how to activate my BS detector, looking at different perspectives I would never have considered ever in my life, and thinking more critically about everyday situations that are mundane to me, but really there is more to it than I know. So it started with everyone's debates. So watching the debates of my classmates, I immediately saw how deliberate the process of taking sources is, and how you have to, as Haley has mentioned previously, you really have to look into what you believe in and what other people throw at you, because just because there's, let's say, an EDU attached to something doesn't mean you have to believe it right away. So for instance, a lot of our classmates criticized the IPCC, and in the past I probably would have used the IPCC models mindlessly because I view them as an authority of climate change. But really, what this class has made me see is that even those you deem as authorities, you still have to question. And that leads to the Milgram Experiment. So I thought I knew this theoretically, that you don't just blindly follow authority, but really what this class led me to see was how to apply that in my life and how I need to exercise this more. And it is uncomfortable to doubt my own beliefs. This led me to doubt things that I never would have second guessed, especially on climate change. And now I'm able to stand in the middle of different arguments and stand with an open and critical mind. So when it came for the time for me to do my own debate, I realized how difficult it was to filter out sources. You have to ask how old it is. You have to ask yourself how relevant it is. Who wrote it? How are they affiliated with other organizations? How does that affect their credibility? And that also led me to use the crowd test, looking at the relevance of things and not just Googling things. That's a good start point, but you have to go, as you say, into the deep internet for more credible sources. And I realized that there are more than 2 sides to the story. Sometimes you have to stand in the middle and look at all directions. And so ultimately, I use sources that I trust comfortably. I was able to go into my debate, even if I knew my own flaws. I looked into my sources carefully, and that really filtered out a lot of sources I would have used in the past because they were EDU sources, because they were sources that I trust from different universities. So I was able to see other perspectives on climate change that I never would have considered. And it also helped me that I received different feedback from my classmates. And as Passmore has said on his work, the difficulty with encouraging critical discussion is that the teacher will almost certainly have many beliefs which he is not prepared to submit to criticism, and he will be enforcing many rules of which the same is true. So even growing up in the lower education in Catholic school for 13 years,
1 minute.
I was discouraged really to think of opposition. And so being in this class has opened my mind to these things. And the journals also help me to view my everyday conversations more critically. I initially viewed them as silly, but I saw that there was more to them. I won't give an example for the lack of time, but everyday conversations have a lot of unstated assumptions that you need to watch for, as the journals have showed us. So I walk out of this class really asking everyone I know when I have everyday arguments, I say, fascinating claim, got any evidence? I legitimately said that to one of my friends.
Okay, stay up there for a question. Thank you. I was pleased to see that you used the crap detector. Tell us just how useful it was and what elements of it you took out of it most prominently.
Yeah. So
take your hand out of your pocket. Yeah.
So when we were doing the orientation in the library, I was familiar with the crap test in the past, but I didn't really know the elements of it. So to me, it's mostly the timestamp on things. Just because something was credible before doesn't mean it's credible now, especially in the scientific community and on climate change, where you really have to consider the latest of things. So that time mostly helped me because I never would have really considered it that much. So let's say 2010 would have been okay for me, but now it wouldn't.
Great, fantastic, Chris. Thank you. Okay, next in line is Harneet. Oh, big zero, okay. Next is Imani. Absent? She's sick? Sick of the class, okay. Next would be William. William, I'll have to adjust this. Sorry, William, just stand there. I can't make you go back any further. Come on, Betsy. Okay. William Chen stands before us, ready to share with us his reflections on critical thinking and his BS detector.
So I'm sure we could all agree that human beings are naturally inclined to argue, whether it's arguing what to have for lunch or whether it's arguing a piece of legislation that could affect the entire country. So I'm sure that we can also all agree that it's important to determine whether or not, or determine the differences between good argumentation and bad argumentation. Prior to taking this class, I thought that what made up a good argument was having lots of evidence and being able to refute the other person's evidence. But as John Passmore says in his essay, Teaching on Critical Thinking, that debating in formal instances only really develops your forensic skills and not really what he calls the critical spirit. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in 3 points. First, what I've learned. Secondly, how I've developed my BS detector. And thirdly, where we can go from here. So first, originally when we watched Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth, I realized that even things that spark social movements worldwide, the idea of climate change consciousness, those things can be susceptible to the pitfalls of fallacies and false information. And that made me realize that I myself should be more cognizant of not only the authority figures in my life, but also the information that we take in. Because as we all know, we are in the information age. Thus, we have to be more aware of the things that we're taking in constantly every day. So one of the biggest takeaways that I took out of the course material, such as the Milgram Experiment that we learned about, was that human beings are more susceptible to just blindly obeying authority, although we would like to believe that we aren't. And I've tried to adopt that into my own thinking. I've not only tried to question the authorities in my life, but also question why exactly I listen to them. And that's also something that I've learned from this class. One of the many tools that I've adopted is the CRAP test, and also the idea of the argumentation journals. I think one of the biggest things that Professor Miller has tried to push on us is being more aware of our environment. And I think using the argumentation journals has helped me become more aware, not only of my environment, but also of things like emotionalism and verbal and nonverbal communication. I think these are things that these aren't concepts that were new to me, but these weren't necessarily concepts that I was using in my everyday life. Which leads me to my second point about the BS detector. So I think the CRAP test was a really it was an eye-opening moment for me in this class, because again, the concepts of relevancy and currency weren't new to me, but I never really sat down and analyzed evidence in that sort of format. And I think that using the CRAP test and a BS detector in conjunction with one another is a really good way of determining not only the information that you believe to be true, determining whether or not it actually is, but also seeing things from the other side. Because I think prior to this class, again, I had said that when it came to climate change, if you didn't believe in it, I did not grant adherence. I thought that that person lost all credibility to me. But throughout this class, I've learned that all claims, so whether it's claims that I don't believe to be true at face value, or claims that I just believe to be true because they fall in line with my own values, I believe that all of these things should be analyzed critically, which leads me to my third and final point of where do we go from here? Again, I believe that as college students and as people who immerse themselves in higher education, it's important that we question everything, because if we don't, and if we don't pass these values on to the next generations, then essentially we're going to be stuck in gridlock. And I believe that nothing truly is cut and dry. So I've begun to sort of implement the things like the CRAP test and my BS detector in my everyday life, and I encourage everyone to do so as well. Again, Professor Miller has promoted this idea of being hyper-selective, or not hyper-selective, hyper-aware of our environment, and I think that this is the biggest takeaway that I have had in this class. Thank you.
Thank you very much. William, let me ask you a real quick question, because I noticed that you did sort of the synthesis with the CRAP test and some of what Passmore was advocating, and yet you made the statement that was a little in conflict with what Haley was arguing. And I want to ask you about Passmore felt that there were some limits to just debating, if you were just debating and learning rhetorical tricks. Do you see any way out of that? Did you feel that we fell into that trap in this class, or you know what I'm getting at here?
Yeah, so I think this class had a good mix. I was pleasantly surprised that we would have things outside of just debating, because like Passmore says, just sort of debating one-on-one, you can kind of fall, or you can be susceptible to the pitfalls of just like looking at things from a forensic perspective. Yeah. But I think things like the argumentation journals really help to fill in the gaps that just debating would leave.
Great. Thank you very much, William. Next is Malik. And on deck, so we don't have this big time lag, is Sydney. This will be the on deck chair. You're on deck. What? Sydney is on deck. So let her sit in the chair is what I'm trying to tell you. So vacate the chair, baby. Oh boy.
3-foot difference.
Give me a moment to oh boy. Yeah. Stand forward a little bit, please. Come forward. Back one step. Yeah. Over that way one step. Yeah. Perfection. Yeah. Okay. Shh. Silence, please. Why is your computer open and your eyeball's not on the speaker? Very rude. Okay, Malik is about to share with us in her final speech of the quarter, maybe even of her life, at UCLA. Aren't you a senior?
I am, but it's not a final speech of my life.
Oh, well, your
Just
life at
UCLA,
UCLA,
yeah,
yeah,
probably.
unless you're graduation speaker. I didn't mean you were gonna die. The final speech of today. Yeah, okay, that's better. Sorry, Malik, yes.
Hi everyone.
Begin.
My name is Malik.
I'm Malik.
As I was preparing for this final, I was reading Passmore's On Teaching to Be Critical, and I found the quote that the practice of criticism that is vital to democracy, that is essential to the development of science and so on, is a crucial step forward. And I found this to be a very impactful quote. In fact, the very reason why I decided to take this argumentation course in the beginning is because I decided that these critical thinking skills were detrimental to my career, as I pursued my law career. Therefore, my goal coming into this class was to heighten my critical thinking, to learn to ask good and doubtful questions, and to gain public speaking knowledge. My BS detector has expanded in this class, and this is significant because I am now a more critical person because of it, and I learned to question others' arguments as well as my own arguments before I present them. To give you a brief outline, I'm going to start with what I learned, how I expanded my BS detector, and how I will continue to expand it. Prior to enrolling in this class, I've never engaged in any public speaking whatsoever. In fact, I've avoided it. I did not want to have anything to do with it. After taking this course, I realized that it has helped me tremendously in other classes as well as in my everyday life.
Great.
It has allowed me to develop better arguments that include claims and evidence, to track down logical fallacies, to point out flaws in other people's arguments, and to always ask questions. But most importantly, this class has led me to always ask questions, no matter what the argument is and no matter who presents the argument.
Great.
Besides the development of my public speaking skills, this course has allowed me to analyze my own beliefs and the reasons behind them. I've always been a firm believer in climate change and considered to have these strong beliefs because of my own knowledge and own reasons. However, after writing the journal about the Milgram Experiment and watching the Milgram Experiment, I realized that these strong beliefs that I hold around climate change have been reflections of what my parents hold. The beliefs that I hold about climate change stem from the beliefs of authority figures in my life, like my parents, my friends, and so on.
Good.
And so this journal entry, along with the other journal entries, has allowed me to, through critical thinking and reflecting on my past actions and behavior, to realize that I have not engaged in it at all.
Great.
And so these have been eye-opening, as they gave me, again, the opportunity to reflect and critically analyze my day-to-day interactions, including my own. Whether it was observing unassumed assumptions, generalizations, stereotypes, logical fallacies, I found myself critiquing and questioning arguments more and more often. Passmore states that teaching pupils to be critical is a difficult job for educators. I believe that Professor Miller and this class did a great job at this, because I think that we were able to debate one another on a very sensitive topic while respecting qualities such as courtesy, justice, and consideration for others. Throughout my career as a student, there has been very little educational efforts that were dedicated to critical thinking, which made, again, these sensitive topics to be untouchable. And so I was glad that in this class we were able to touch on them, and I was able to explore other arguments that I have never been exposed to. So the debates conducted by my peers also allowed me to gain more knowledge about this. They brought to light arguments that, developing countries need these cheap house energy sources, or that scientific models are actually not that accurate, or that the carbon tax policy is not a one-size-fits-all. So besides the expansion of my perspective and horizons. This class expanded my BS Detector speech because I began noticing the importance of evidence and citations. The less evidence is cited in people's speeches, the less knowledgeable they are about a topic. And this also helps me develop and expand my evaluation criteria. Like the CRAP tests, I question the currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose of my arguments, whereas before I didn't really have that much evaluation criteria before asking other people questions about their arguments.
Good.
In conclusion, I hope to continue the expansion of my BS Detector and to constantly engage in acts of critical thinking, whether through questioning or asking valuable questions to arguments, to ask for evidence when others make claims and provide evidence of my own when necessary.
Great. Thank you, Malik. You've told us that your parents were the source of your, can I call it a belief in the truth of global warming. You don't have to answer if it's too personal,
Okay.
but have you gingerly over the dinner table prodded or poked at the subject with these authority figures, or would they cut off your stipend from going to college?
I've once pointed out the inaccuracy of scientific climate models and how they can never predict that far into the future, and that they're usually generated in labs because you can't test outside, you can't stimulate a hurricane outside. But they've always said that there's inaccuracy in everything. Climate models are never going to be perfect. Scientific research is never 100% accurate, and the climate models are as good as it gets for what we have.
I see. Did they say who's putting the shit in your head, or?
Yeah, well, they said, why would you take such a class? But yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I succeeded. Thank you, Malik. Next is Sydney Allen Wade, and on deck is Frank Frisbee. Sit in the chair over there, Frank. Okay, let's see, I got to, can you come forward, right there, yes, and one step that way, and one step this way, ooh, right there, yeah, you're perfect. That's perfect, okay, Sydney Allen Wade. Let me take a sip of the old ice coffee. Okay, quiet please. Sydney stands before you, managing attention, making sure all eyeballs are on her. That means you, Haley. Communicating respect non-verbally, finding friendly eyes near the front and the center. Say your name, feel the love. Relax your hands behind your back. People think you have a gun back there. Say your speech.
Okay. Hello, my name is Sydney.
Hi, Sydney.
So, I think overall, when we look at like our country, or just in terms of when political elections come around, people often associate argumentation with negativity, and people don't like arguing, even though we naturally do it all the time. People rather not get into heated arguments because either they're afraid of being proven wrong, or they just feel very sensitive to be criticized by their peers, whoever they're in the argument with. Going into this class, I think I've realized that argumentation and debating obviously are intertwined, because in order to have a debate, you have multiple arguments involved in that debate, and it showed me that you can effectively argue without being sensitive and without having so many high intense emotions running through your mind, and that's ultimately led me to be a much more effective arguer with my friends and peers and whoever else I come into an argument with. Overall, I also realized that more often than not, especially now currently in this political administration, credible evidence isn't necessarily as valued as I think it once was, and so it's even further shown me that we really do need to be more effective with how we argue against other people when they don't have credible evidence, since evidence I feel like isn't really so much put into people's arguments, based on every day that I watch the news. So overall, this class has exposed to me how complex issues can be, and it's persuaded me to more critically think when I get into arguments and make that a habit and use more of my bullshit detector. So this class, going into it, I've already mentioned before last week that I didn't even think you could argue climate change anymore because it's just an established fact in my mind. But the subtopics, like, policies especially, show you that there are some ways to point out flaws in climate change, though I overall look at climate change as overall happening and it's real. There's many different things that go into climate change, especially within politics, and so I think that's really shown me how to more critically think about climate change and about the motives behind climate change concerning fracking,
3 minutes left.
concerning different levels of sea rising or sea level rising, and especially with scientists and who they are, because more often than not I usually think scientists are credible, so I believe what they say, and since I'm not a scientist, I've never really thought to argue against a scientist, but now after seeing the evidence brought forth within our debates, I now realize that not all scientists really come with the approach of like being completely accurate, because sometimes they might be pushing a narrative. Especially I think this class exposed to me just how relevant this class can be to alternative facts, and how alternative facts became a phrase that now is widely used, and almost like people think it's funny to throw the term around, but it just shows to you how we aren't so much more concerned with critical thinking since we've been pushing alternative information that supports our narrative, and people still use that information in their arguments when we've clearly seen it's alternative and it's not the actual factual claims that we should be putting forth in the news or mainstream media. And I think with mainstream media especially, we can't necessarily always go along with what the mainstream news is saying. I think more often than not that's actually more concerning. We have to take the time to step back, look at the information posed by the mainstream, and find our own information to go along with what we find important, because sometimes the stuff that we are told is important may not be as important to us as it is to the people in power.
1 minute left.
And then with my bullshit detector, I've realized that I already thought I had a pretty strong bullshit detector, but I think I need to use it more effectively with people I don't know. I usually just used it with friends and family, but now I feel like I need to start using it with people that I hear on the street, or when I'm in some type of situation with someone, I need to bring it out more, even though I don't know the person and I'm worried that I might hurt their feelings. Like John Passmore said on teaching to be critical thinkers, I think we also need to make it more of a habit to critically think and teach younger people, younger than us, to read, to investigate, to learn as much as we can. We need to be more curious, more creative, and really try to get a more complex understanding of the things around us, because I personally feel like a lot of us are neglecting how important it is to go against whoever is in power and authority figures. Even if we think it's disrespectful, there's a way to be respectful and question people. But ultimately, this class was great.
Thank you, Sydney Allen Wade. You need to stay up there for a question, ma'am. I want to ask you a question, and don't stand step forward. Don't take this wrong, but you notice that other people had a format that was given, which is to say a little introduction and a preview of the 3 or 4 or 5 points you were going to cover, and then a summary of them, and then a tieback. And that's a real clear way to communicate your ideas. You chose to just sort of do a stream of consciousness thing to cover everything, storytelling, right? But storytelling can also have these, previews, so they're easy to follow and know what's coming. Did you choose to not do that because you felt it harmed your story? Is that your answer?
I felt like I still approached the main issues when I started the speech. I did say overall I realized how much more complex issues can be,
Yeah.
how I need to be more aware of my surroundings and use my BS detector more often.
Yeah.
I did preface it, but I think overall I still kind
Okay.
of addressed those 3 points that I said. I just didn't clearly say these are my 3 points.
Yeah. Okay, good.
But I mean, I don't know, sometimes I could go off on a tangent, but I think right now especially a lot of people do that because we are just overall shocked by what's going on politically. So.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Sydney. Frank Frisbee is supposed to be in the hot seat. He's not, of course. James Gardner is supposed to be in the hot seat. No James Gardner. No James Gardner. Next on the hot seat is Brittany.
Wait. I'm here.
I know, but next on the hot seat is Brittany. Is Brittany here? Okay, could you come up to the hot seat, please? Could you hand me two donut holes, please? Do it with a napkin because you're coughing. I don't want your germs. Here, I'll get them myself. I don't want your germs. Can I talk back to my wife? Mr. Frisbee, Mr. Frank Frisbee, a famous name in the Twilight Zone. Take a step to the left, please.
Your left?
My left, yeah. Take a half step forward. Back. Yeah. Frank stands before you, looking for eyeballs. That includes you, Lulu. No glasses. Okay, stop talking. Thank you. Frank's going to share with us his take on critical thinking and his BS detector. Frank, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Okay.
Begin, sir.
I don't think this discussion really, I don't think a BS detector really has anything to do with critical thinking as a whole. I think it's a very specific part in the critical thinking process. So kind of confused like how to approach this talk. So I'll go over the 3 steps, of course, that Professor Miller wants us to do. What have I learned? What do we know now? And everything about my BS detector. But from John Passmore, I want to talk a little bit about what he thinks critical thinking is, which
Good.
I just summarized, which was like the point of this class.
Good.
So, to exhibit critical spirit, one must be alert to the possibility that the established norms themselves ought to be rejected, and the rules ought to be changed, and the criteria used in judging performances modified. So, a BS detector, I think, is the third part. It's the judging mechanism. It falls in the criteria. It falls in the part where when you're starting to analyze something, you're starting to think if it's valid. Do you want this in your life? Do you think it's worthy, and all that else? Yeah. So when I think about this class, I think that the BS detector had 2 parts. One was evidence and one was fact. And one was, okay, well, is the evidence worthy, right? So your bullshit detector would show if it's worthy or not on the evidence. So that would be like if it's up to date, if the professors are worthy, if the places are credible organizations, how are they paid. And another is to push the idea of when you consider something as fact. So do you consider something as fact when your parents say it, when someone says it? So I think coming in, I was decent at both of those. So I didn't really gain too much in terms of those 2 from this class. I'll say what I did gain was just an idea of like what bullshit detectors were. Mainly reading from the John Passmore's, I think his name is, from his book. And I learned most by just thinking about it on my own and realizing that bullshit detectors are used in like every realm of thinking. It's used in science, it's used with your family, there's not this like one BS detector out there. It's the number you have. So I don't think scientifically my bullshit detector didn't really like improve at all, but I think in analyzing my bullshit detector, it can improve, generally speaking. So I want to give a specific example. So in this class, we asked, why is it good to be up to date, right? So we question our bullshit detector specifically. Why do we want this condition on our bullshit detector? And its obvious answer is because, well, science changes. Our facts should change over time. Facts aren't static, so it should all be fluid, and it shouldn't be static at all. So I think in questioning my bullshit detector in all those realms, that's the best way to improve. So so I guess I'll move on from bullshit detectors. So what have I learned from this class? I learned a lot from all you guys' debates. I thought it was really interesting. There were some that were weirdly worded that I just didn't even really gain too much from, like on balance is catastrophic. I just thought that was a whole bunch of like biased bullshit. So I didn't really think like, all right, this question didn't even make sense. Is it catastrophic? Like, I forgot who's debating, but if it's catastrophic to one person, it can be. So I mean, it's completely relative. But going through, since I'll just run out of time by talking about what I learned from your guys' debates. Human activity is responsible for global warming. I think generally speaking, I grew to the middle ground. I started to see both sides more because of all these debates. So when I think about human activities responsible for global warming, I think, yeah, in part, of course, but there are many parts, and you should just analyze all of them to the extent that they do affect global warming. Is environmental concerns greater than economic growth? Again, I think these things should be balanced, right? Like if we want to affect, we can't think of affecting one and not affecting the other. These things are entwined, they're married, and if you want to improve one the most, you should try and improve both of them optimally. Try to get them both to improve in this situation. I wasn't here for the reducing carbon emission because I had the flu. I was just like staying home the whole time. So I'm gonna move on to the next one, sorry. Extreme climate events are imminent consequences of global warming. I think this one was interesting because each climate event is so specific in how it works and how like heat actually affects the type of event. So I think you need to get in the details. So in analyzing that, I realized it's dependent. Like earthquakes, hurricanes, it's all different. It's all not affected the same way. You have to look at it piece by piece and be critical at on each event specifically. So that was my main takeaway. Global warming on balance is catastrophic. Yeah, again, I didn't like the wording of that question at all. That's U.S. should unilaterally reduce carbon emissions. I actually really like that one because I don't think it was the main point of the speaker, but I think they made a point to say if we did nothing, there'd still be a lot of carbon emissions in the past that have been that's in our atmosphere right now, and we should work on that as well. So so we should actually suck it out of our air and also reduce further emissions. So yeah, I'm out of time. So.
Okay, good. Thank you, sir, for Frank Frisbee. Yes. Well, you shared with us what you learned, and you made some mention of Passmore and his critical thinking, and you did address the BS detector in some detail and how it didn't really gel. And you wisely said that every field, every wise practitioner has a BS detector. I was in a group of 30 scientists that met every Wednesday night for dinner called the Center for the Study of the Origin and Evolution of Life, and J. William Schaff led it, and he particularly brought in scholars from 30 different disciplines to share their insights into the role of evolution, and I brought in the rhetorical perspective of arguing about evolution and creationism. And I noticed that every discipline, every department, and every individual had their own critical mechanism that they brought to the table. So you were very right on that. On Milgram, I didn't hear you address Milgram much. So, you have anything to say about Milgram?
I think it goes back to questioning your facts. When I was saying, do you get it from your parents, or do you get it from like the leaders in that field specifically? Yeah. When people say like be more critical, I think that's just dumb. I think like there's certain areas we won't. Like you shouldn't try and force this. Like if you understand what critical thinking is, it's always brought to you by a desire to be critical or to understand a certain field, right? Like I don't care about like knitting, right? So I'm not gonna be critical about like, oh, this is the best way to knit. If a leader tells me that in that field, they're like, this is the best way to knit. I'm gonna be like, sure, right? I don't care. I'm not gonna be critical.
I know, but that was one of the points that Passmore made. You're silly if you walk around questioning everything.
Yeah, it does make
You're
sense.
just ridiculous. Okay, well, thank you so much, Frank. Good job. Okay, we now have Brittany, and on deck will be Lean. Lean, get in the hot seat. Sir, if you're going to continue to cough, could you take another seat? Because I don't want to be sick.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't want his helmet. I don't blame me either. Thank you, Haley, for the donut holes. Breakfast. Okay, you need to stand in the power stance. You remember that? Feet wider than your shoulders. Step back, 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 back. Over that way now. That way. And back one more step. Perfect. And yeah, no. You gotta put you can't see your hands. They gotta be, they won't, can't you put them above your above your elbows? Yeah, so they stay up. You need your hands working. Okay. Brittany stands before you, managing attention, checking eyeballs. Communicating respect non-verbally. Finding friendly eyes near the front and the center. Say your name, feel the love. Start your speech.
Brittany.
Hi, Brittany.
Upon taking this class, I took it from a recommendation from my roommate, in which she told me that I would learn valuable life lessons in it, and I had no idea that that would mean defining critical thinking, and also to realize that I had an inherent bullshit detector. For me, when I was reading the passages from Passover and also the Milgram Experiment, I saw my own self-doubt, and I was identifying it through this, both the journal and the experiment. To start, when I was watching the Milgram Experiment, I found that each of the students that were listening to the authority figures were a lot like me, because I always consider myself a passive person, but after learning about being critical and critical thinking, it was just because I didn't know how to voice how I felt, and so I was just being lazy because I felt that it was easier just to accept someone else's opinion instead of form my own, because why deal with the conflict and the debate? But I didn't realize that by hindering my critical thinking, that I was allowing for authorities to dictate my voice and how I feel about certain issues, such as with my parents, how they feel is how I feel, which is not true. And if you have the ability to understand that parents can be acting as authority figures and abusing that power, then you can take control of it. So when I define critical thinking, I would say that it's the opposite of what Passmore says. In the teaching example, when he said that teachers act to criticize, they are criticizing you to silence you, because they fear that if you voice your opinion, then you're going to disrupt their ability to stay complacent and to follow the rules and to continue on in that kind of unfolding pattern. And furthermore, when I looked at what having a bullshit detector meant, for me, that was realizing that when I didn't speak my mind and I wasn't thinking critically in the way that thinking critically means to actually assess how you feel, be comfortable and independent enough to speak about how you feel, that I would be able to detect when somebody was telling me false information. And the 3 things that I learned from this class as a takeaway was public speaking skills, the ability to think critically, and also my bullshit detector. So to start with the 3 things that I learned in this class, my first would be definitely public speaking skills. When I was talking about the identification with myself and the self-doubt, I tied it to each of these 3 things that I learned, and that when I was public speaking, I had no idea how much I doubted myself. I was reading the paper and I just didn't believe in what I was saying, but that's because I've never been able to say how I feel, and I didn't have the confidence to speak out loud in front of a class and to articulate it. And so, taking from what Professor said in class about Aristotle's 3 components of of credibility, if you can't deliver and have if you can't deliver in a confident manner, then who is going to believe you? Are you going to believe somebody who's looking down or who's stuttering or who can't talk, or are you going to believe someone who's direct and confident and able to express how they feel?
Good.
Secondly, I wanted to talk about how I learned about critical thinking in the ability to see how we are restricted by not voicing our own opinions. It really interweaved into my own life, and with the journals I was able to observe how many unstated assumptions in which the people around me were saying and the reasons that they were giving. And I realized that when you don't say how you feel, and when people think that you're passive or you'll just accept anything they're saying, then they won't tell you the truth. They're gonna bullshit you, and they will say anything because they know you'll believe it. And that inability to read through the lines is because you're being not lazy, but lazy not to get out of your comfort zone and to test what they're saying. And finally, with the third thing that I had learned about the bullshit detector, it was just that in life, people are going to tell you what they want to hear, but if you're able to be meta and open and listening and actually actively listening and not just taking what they're saying and letting it go out one ear and moving on, but really critically challenging what they're saying and speaking forward, then you can make a difference in your life, in your relationships, and overall with yourself.
Thank you, Brittany. Yeah. Brittany, a great improvement over your last presentation, and thank you for having the courage to come back from your disaster. And I think we should give her another round of applause. It was very good, yeah. My only suggestion would just be I would like just a little more narrative to be in the presentation of a good solid preview of what you're going to do and a good solid summary of what you did, and but overall you did a very nice job, and it was a very thoughtful presentation. Thank you. Okay, Lean is coming up, and in the hot seat. Can you go to the back of the room or something? I don't like coughers. Thank you. Nothing personal. Love you, but don't love your cough. Yeah. And Yassine.
Sorry.
Yassine. Okay, you're in the hot seat. Yeah.
Oh yeah? What flavor you got?
Yes.
What are you going to by last name?
Alphabetically by last name. What?
I said I didn't hear my name called, and my name starts with an A.
What's your name? What's your name?
Ikechi.
Ikechi what?
Anian.
You're not on the roll sheet.
Well, I was added 30 weeks, so that's probably why.
Okay, well, shall we rip her off the podium and put you up there now, or what do you want to
I was
do?
just waiting for my name to be called, so.
Oh, what do you want me to do?
I can go after.
You want to be next?
You want the hot seat?
Let's put her on the hot seat! Okay, Lean, could you please, could you please come forward? More, back, and then over there, and back a little bit. Perfect, Lean. Do I have your dealio? Yes, I do. She's a lean machine. Okay. Lane is in the power stance, feet wider than your shoulders, not like that, feet wider than your shoulders, and you don't sway. Okay? You look around the room, communicating respect non-verbally, saying to yourself, I respect my audience. You're looking for all eyeballs beyond you, including Haley. What are you writing back there? Dissertation? And she says to herself, I respect my audience, and you really mean it. Lighting friendly eyes near the front and the center. Take a step forward. Say your name, feel the love. Start your speech.
Hi guys, my name is Lane.
Hi, Lane.
Hi. So JFK famously said, too often we enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. That quote really highlights the importance of critical thinking, which is the ability to analyze and present rather than accepting personal reasoning as proof. Critical thinking is an important process to grow, controls one's learning ability, and gain empathy for other people's opinions. So what have we learned in this class? We learned that although the abstract phrase of critical thinking has been thrown at us at a very young age by authority figures such as teachers, professors, and tests, we know of how important it is. We know that we have never experienced it more than here in class. And it has really helped us in being more self-disciplined, more self-monitored, and more corrective to our own thoughts and opinions. We embodied critical thinking in all parts of this class, starting from our debates, when we researched our debates, when we planned them, and even when we went on to debate them. We also embodied critical thinking through our journals, when we looked at all the personal experiences that we're going through and have all the different perspectives and lenses. We utilized critical thinking to analyze what our day-to-day lives was about. And lastly, we embodied critical thinking through listening to all our peers' debates and trying to understand what they were debating and trying to come up with our own conclusions of where we really stand. Which leads us to the next questions of what do we know? I think something we can all agree on is we are all walking out of this class with more knowledge about global warming and climate change, but at the same time we realize that there's a lot more that we can learn about it. Learning more would not be by reading articles and reading research journals, but rather taking what they say as facts. But rather we have to critically think through all the arguments that they are saying, and constantly challenge our thoughts and opinions we have. So for example, in our debates, we were challenged not only to read the evidence of our topic, but rather read about what the opposition is also doing, so we can come up with more evidence and refute that later. And after this process, I believe that we all come to the realization that no matter how much we educate ourselves on a topic, we're always left with more information to learn. So, do we really know enough about what we really know? As for describing the BS detector and how it has evolved throughout this quarter, my BS detector expanded greatly in this quarter. And an example of that would be when I did my advertisement journal. We were challenged to look at all the steps that an advertisement presents and think if we want to grant adherence to it or not. And after this journal, I'm never looking at advertisements the same way again. Every time an advertisement is presented, I always in my mind think of the 4 steps that I had to do, and finally and see if I grant adherence to it or not.
Good.
The way that I can apply BS detector outside of the classroom is by listening to facts that people are presenting with me, constantly challenging the thoughts that I have, and also possibly teach the younger generations of how important critical thinking is. John Passmore, the author of Teaching to Be Critical, said that we should teach children the value of why they think of the way they they think of what they think, rather than just listening to authority figures and going by that. So just to summarize, we learned that critical thinking was a very important process throughout our whole class. In our debates specifically, we know that although we know a lot more information coming out of this class, we still have a lot more to learn. And our BS detector through this class, we can apply to our day-to-day life situations moving on forward. And overall, this class had taught me a lot of valuable lessons that I can apply both in my professional and personal life. Critical thinking is really a weapon that we can articulate our thoughts better and be more empathetic to other people's opinions. Lastly, critical thinking challenges the quote that JFK said, which is, we turn our opinions to deep thoughts that are backed by evidence and statistics in our day-to-day lives.
Beautiful. Thank you. Okay, well, Lean, you followed the format. Thank you for waiting outside respectfully. Very nice. You followed the format beautifully. I would like to hear more about what you have to say about the Milgram Experiment. I didn't hear much about that in your presentation. So, up and away on Milgram and integrate it into your presentation very quickly.
Yeah, basically, so I feel like I tried to touch upon it a little bit by mentioning that a lot of authority figures have always dictated that we should think critically and do that. And one thing that I noticed is that we always listen to them and we have a lot of different responses and perspectives when we're responding to authority figures than we do when we're talking to our peers or people that are relatively from the same perspective as you are. So going back to authority figures, because professors and teachers and news personnel, people who are a lot more educated than us, would talk mostly about climate change, I believe that I personally have taken climate change to be a fact that is very dangerous to us, that through this class I was able to challenge my own thoughts rather than just adhering to authority figures that have preached about this topic.
Thank you, Lane.
You're welcome.
Very nice following the format. Okay, next is someone not on the list. So what's your last name? Spell it.
A-N-Y.
A-N-Y. I-A-N. M.
My name has been on the sign-in sheet, so if it's not on the roster, then I've been getting graded. Okay, because I'm like, what does it say?
It's a mystery. And what's your first name?
I-K-E-C-H-I.
I-K-E.
C-H-I.
C-H-I.
That's it.
Praise the Lord. Okay. Say that way. This way. More this way. Back a half step. Over this way, one half step. Over this way, a half step, please. Yeah. Okay, do I have your paper?
Yeah, I give it to you.
Lean. Okay. Brittany. I don't have it. Frank. Is it hidden here? Malik. William. Haley. I don't have it. Did you?
I gave it to you in the beginning when you asked for if there's any assignments that anybody needed to turn in.
Oh, great. It's over in my office.
Can I go get it, Professor?
She'll go get it, so have a seat. So we'll move along to Yassine. And in the hot seat will be Natalie Hines. Thank you. Yassine stands before us in the perfect spot. Yes, stay there, yes. And he's looking for all eyeballs to be on him, communicating respect nonverbally. Say your name, feel the love, start your speech.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Yassine, as the professor just said.
Hi, Yassine.
Howdy. Growing up, kids are always told to, respect and listen, most importantly, listen to their elders, teachers, and authority figures in life because, they're older, wiser, and just know more. And generally that's true. Adults are usually wiser than kids. They've been through more schooling, been through more life experiences, and generally just understand and see nuances that kids don't really have the ability to see. But at the same time, I won't say all adults, but the majority of adults have been indoctrinated into our society and societal norms. And that's actually the reason why a lot of people say that kids have a more pure perspective on life, because they're not being restrained by societal norms. And the thing is, when people become indoctrinated into society and into societal norms, they oftentimes stop and either forget or are reluctant to question that society and its norms. And this brings me to a passage from John Passmore's paper on teaching to be critical. And I quote, "For to exhibit a critical spirit, one must be alert to the possibility that the established norms themselves ought to be rejected, that the rules ought to be changed, the criteria used in judging performances modified, or even that the mode of performance ought not to take place at all." And that's what so many people are so afraid and reluctant to do, either because they never think to do it, or they just are scared that they're in their comfort zone and they're scared to leave that zone. And as a young kid, sometimes I would question what an adult would tell me, and I was oftentimes met with a very patronizing answer. And obviously as a kid I didn't know what the word patronizing meant, but I definitely knew what it felt like, and it felt a lot like disrespect. And I used to always ask myself, why can't you just be straight up? I'm a kid, come on now, I'm just trying to learn. But obviously, not all adults are like that. A lot of adults engage in honest dialogue with me, and those are really the people that helped me develop my critical thinking skills. It's just being able to engage in this dialogue and hear what they say and how they back up their assertions, and just thinking, that part of what you said, that didn't really sound right. Could you explain your line of thinking? Could you tell me how you got to that point? That sort of analysis and dissection of what people say, I think, is hugely important to developing critical thinking skills. And I've always thought that I've been a pretty good critical thinker, but not until recently have I realized that I haven't actually been utilizing my critical thinking skills as much as I could have. So I grew up in Berkeley, so I was indoctrinated at a young age into the liberal progressive ideology and dogma that the city is pretty famous for. And I never really questioned all of that and a lot of the beliefs that came with it when I was a kid and even through high school. And it was in part because I didn't want to be chastised for questioning these things, but it was mostly just because all those beliefs and stances, they just felt right, in my gut, and at the time that was enough, and I didn't need any more than that. But it was only when I got to college and I was exposed to a lot of different people, and most importantly, people who had very different viewpoints than I did, and had to interact with them, that I started asking myself, why do I believe the things that I believe? And I've found that asking yourself that question, why do I believe the things that I believe, can be extremely powerful. For example, for me, why do I believe in climate change? Why do I believe that healthcare and education, how many minutes? 1 minute? What? All right, I'll skip these questions. And sometimes questioning my beliefs about something has led me to completely change my opinion. Sometimes it's actually reinforced my opinion when presented with more evidence. I've realized that I believe what I believed even more than before. But most of the time, though, questioning my own beliefs and talking to people who disagree with me has just led me to understand and see nuances in topics that I otherwise wouldn't have seen and didn't see prior. And this class is actually a great example of that, because coming in, I was convinced that like anthropomorphic climate change was a fact. I was as sure of it as I was sure that if I had an apple in my hand and I let go of it, that it would drop to the ground. And this class, and that's really the beauty of the two-sided debates, has really opened my eyes to the nuances that need to be addressed when speaking of climate change. And to wrap this up, I've learned that being open-minded is extremely important, and I'll continue to do my best to engage in dialogue, honest dialogue with people, no matter how much I disagree with their beliefs, how stupid I think their question is, and no matter what their age is.
Good, thank you. Yeah, well, your last point, that's called being respectful, and that's a very good quality to have when you're arguing or debating or continuing to live your life, Yasin. Thank you for your observations. I want to ask you, you certainly gave us a long personal exposition of what you learned in your life's history of growing up in Berkeley. If you could, in 30 seconds, just make a comment on your BS detector, the Milgram Experiment, and those two things. I think
Those two things, 30 seconds?
Yeah, I didn't hear them covered in your presentation, and
well,
that was part of the prom.
That's true.
Yeah.
I think I've always had a pretty solid BS detector, and I think Sydney said this earlier, but it's not so much like refining it, which I always, you can always refine it, but it's more so like when to use it, and that's something I tried to touch on when I was talking, is that I've always had good critical thinking skills, I just wasn't using them. So just through this class and just through college, I've learned that I need to like constantly be on my toes and questioning what people are saying. And in terms of the Milgram Experiment, I don't know, it's kind of weird because the Milgram Experiment is like adults, or not adults, like authority figures telling other people to do messed up stuff. And I've never really had that experience literally, but just in terms of authority figures telling me to do stuff, I've actually had like problems with like soccer coaches, because I just like would like butt heads with them just because I disagreed with what they would say. And what I've learned through that is that it's not necessarily about not doing what the authority figure tells you to do. It's about like respectfully disagreeing and like trying to put out your side of the story in a way that doesn't make them feel attacked, because if they feel attacked, then you're not going to get anywhere. You want to like try to honestly change their mind, and that might not always happen. Probably won't happen most of the time.
Yeah, people need to save face in an argument.
Yeah.
President Trump knows that very well. Thank you, Yasin. Okay, Natalie. I'm going to take a quick break. So just chill up there. It's here. Do you want to go ahead of her? You'll be on deck. Okay.
I mean, there's like a whole bunch of random numbers. I was just looking at
Okay, to the left, forward.
Am I waiting till before or after?
Yeah, you'll be next. Step forward, a half step, step back, half step back. Okay. Okay, folks. Natalie Hines stands before you, managing attention. Okay, of course, is writing her thesis. She's communicating respect non-verbally. Saying to yourself, I respect my audience and their relationship. Finding friendly eyes near the front and the center. Say your name. Feel the love. Start your speech.
Hi, I'm Natalie.
Hi, Natalie.
So the word critical often gains a negative connotation. For centuries, humans have bought into the idea that criticism is a process of feeling, one that can clearly hurt another person, but in fact, it's a process of thinking. Criticism or critical thinking is defined as the mental process of going about deciding what to think or what to believe. So as audience members or decision makers, it's our job to grant adherence to an argument, which can be enhanced by critical thinking, the overall goal of argumentation everywhere.
Perfect.
In this class, from participating in a debate and listening to other debates, I've discovered that critical thinking requires us to set aside our own beliefs. It also requires us to set aside beliefs from authorities to figure out why we believe what we do. I've also enhanced my BS detector in this class, and I hope to continue to enhance it by applying a variety of John Passmore's skills in On Teaching to be Critical. This should be important for everyone in this class because critical thinking fosters democracy, which is one of our main values. So being in this class for just a few weeks, I listened to lectures and was able to listen to the tools for critical thinking, but as Passmore points out, you need both logical and empirical examples to truly become a critical thinker. This is where the debates came in. By listening to debates, I was forced to give my feedback and actually make a decision, giving me these empirical and tangible examples. Generally, though, it's not easy to be a critical thinker. Many schools' instructions squash creativity. They focus on examinations and lessons, as Passmore points out in his essay. I think that this class really broke that mold, though, and that's why I enjoyed it. Every time we came in, we were learning a new discussion about a new debate and a new topic, and we were forced to apply our feedback in a new way. Nothing was ever the same. And I think that college in general opened me to a more critical discussion. I came from a small private Catholic high school a year ago, and I would say that questions were rarely asked there, and rules were strictly enforced. So I felt like here, professors really encouraged me to ask questions, and they were engaging in critical thinking, which encouraged me to do the same. This brings me to my next point about authorities. Authorities, as outlined by Milgram in his experiments on obedience, can be large roadblocks in order to show us what we believe and how it influences us. This is why we must look into them. So these roadblocks may not be people, though. They may be institutions such as schools, larger universities, or even the internet. We may not realize that. And I think that the strongest way in order to develop a help in order to look at these authorities would be self-examination. Although this seems like an age-old concept developed by Socrates many, many years ago, it still rings true today because self-examination helps us see why we believe what we do, and after everything, if it still deserves our adherence. I think that the next thing that really helped me in this class were the journals. The journals sometimes were frustrating because I had to look at truly like, why did I think this, and was it induction or deduction that got me here? But overall, I think this was the biggest factor in helping me realize what I thought about climate change. Yes, I do believe climate change exists, as we wouldn't argue it in the class for 10 weeks if it wasn't an issue, but I'm not sure how pressing or how urgent it is. It kind of makes me wonder, are politicians just transmitters of this mindless thinking virus from person to person as facilitated by their authority? So next, I just want to talk a little bit about my BS detector. I think this was the most important insight I gained from this class. I'm able now to recognize BS in an argument, and I look for the source of evidence, I look for the date of evidence, I look for the credentials, things that I never would have looked for before. And I also recognize BS in performance. I can tell when a person isn't prepared. I can tell when they don't care what they're talking about. And this really shows me, do they deserve my adherence? Is it something that I should vouch for? So I think in the future, I just want to continue to expand this BS detector. I not only want to apply it to my own life, but more importantly, as Passmore points out, I want to be an educator, not just a teacher. I want to show future generations that critical thinking is so important and create a more holistic democracy. So to summarize kind of what I said in all, I think that we need to be, in this class, as we've learned, for critical thinking, we need to be able to speak about it, we need to be able to write about it, we need to be able to read about it as we did in the textbook. And in conclusion, critical thinking requires us to set aside our personal beliefs. It also requires us to set aside authoritative beliefs. And these things will tell us why we believe what we do, overall helping to improve our BS detector, something that I also hope to improve in the future. So to tie it all back, yes, critical thinking is actually something positive. The word critical is inherently positive because this process forces us to look at the framework of diversity. It is also the food for progressive thought, and it's something, these two factors are crucial to civil society. Thank you.
Wow. Wish I could, I'd like to can that. Well, Natalie, quick question for you. If you had one thing that you feel that we could do better or differently in terms of coverage, or that we didn't get enough work on, what would it be?
Just like in the class as a whole?
Yeah.
I think that sometimes, like, the format of the debate, like, knowing kind of like how cross-examinations work, for example, seeing of it, like, a clear example of it by two people who, like, are, like, classic debaters, like, know everything about it, because one thing that I felt was really difficult during my debate was asking spontaneous questions. I don't really like being a spontaneous person. I like to plan things out, and so learning how to respond to things that are brought up in the actual, like, debate on the floor would be something that, like, could be a life lesson, I think.
Okay, good. I appreciate the feedback. Thank you, Natalie. Excellent. And next we have Catchy, right? Catchy. And in the hot seat will be Syed. Syed? Syed? No Syed. How about Ricard? Ricard, yeah. Okay, half step back. Yeah, perfect. Okay, good.
Actually, I have 3 copies.
Okay. Begin. We're going to hear from Catchy, right? All eyeballs on Catchy. Put that earphone away. What's so important? I love you. Okay, begin.
Hello everyone, my name is Ikechi, and
Hi, Ikechi.
So during this quarter, this class has been very interesting to me, to say the least. I joined the class in the 3rd week, so I didn't really know what to expect. So when I did see that the class was about argumentation, it did spark an interest in me to join. And I didn't know how the class would be useful to me as a graduating senior, but I think that I've learned, like, skills that are relevant to after my graduation. For instance, these skills would be how important it is to dissect the arguments that we have in everyday life. This would first include my observance of the debates. So during the debates, I was never really in tune with how debates work as well, with like starting points, teams, arguments, and things like that. But once I got into the class, I noticed how effective it was to pull from different sources and have different backings for information. I noticed also how easy it was to argue a claim or a fact or a policy, but how much more easy it was to poke a hole in these arguments. So, for instance, when watching some of you guys' debates, I was more in tune with how we could poke holes in arguments and how you could fact check these arguments. And I think this was important because in every argument in everyday life, it is very easy to pull from your own preferences or your own thoughts rather than things that are actual facts. So by bringing in sources and by bringing in backing, that leads for like an effective argument. So that already showed me how important that was in the class and to my skills in general. In my particular debate, I also remembered Passmore and his stressing of the critical spirit, which is how I was able to look at things when analyzing debates in order to see which argument was best and to make a critical decision in that way. The second thing the class taught me was to be more critical of things such as like journals. So with our argumentative journals that we submitted each week or every other week, these were situations that we were given to write on in topics of different things that the professor gave us. And I think that was very useful in the way that we were able to analyze the different situations that we don't often look at in our everyday lives. One of them that stood out to me in particular was to go 24 hours without giving a reason, which seemed to me as something that I'd never done, but in fact it's something that I've often done. One situation in particular was actually with my own mom when during midterm season. I'm normally very busy, and when I become busy I'm very stressed, so I tend to disengage myself from people, which may include my own parents. So I didn't give my mother a reason for a couple of days why I wasn't responding to her, or why I wasn't communicating with her in the way that I normally do. So I definitely analyzed that situation in my own journal, and I realized just how that argument was perceived in her side versus my side. And that's also something that was relevant in this class and relevant in something that I can take out of. My BS detector in this class has grown. I feel like through the debates and through the journals both, they've grown in determining what's actually like factual and how you can determine if somebody is lying or just creating false sources or things like that. And some of the debates you can tell when people are actively engaged in their own argument, in their own position, rather than talking about something they're actually not interested in. And it's also very evident when something doesn't match your own belief, which caused me to like question some of the arguments and debates that were being presented. And it was also evident when people would bring up their own opinions rather than facts, when we would fact check like sources, or people were able to easily poke holes in their arguments. So all in all, this class has taught me how to, I would say, like, argue better. And what I mean by argue better is by analyzing these situations that like we have in everyday life and changing our meaning of what arguments are and how to effectively solve them. I think that's been important, and that's something that I can take out in everyday life when I go into my career endeavor.
Thank you very much. Did you have any thoughts about the Milgram Experiment and authorities?
I didn't mention that. So I actually did have so I know that talked a lot about like authority figures and everything. And I think like with this class, it's taught me specifically like how that like sometimes we perceive people to be like authority figures, but within our own knowledge we may be more knowledgeable than that, or able to gain that sort of knowledge about certain topics, such as what this class was focused on, which was like climate and global warming and stuff, for my particular argument at least. I became more knowledgeable in that, and I also think that we also have the assumption that because people are of higher ranking or higher standard than us maybe, then they might know more than us. So I think that's where that becomes relevant, at least in the class.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ricard is on the podium, and Jennifer Kim is on the hot seat.
Let's look at.
Hi, Jennifer. Is there any coffee left? They're out, baby.
More?
Thank you, Pretty. Okay, hands out of your pocket. Yes. Ricard stands before us, managing attention, communicating respect non-verbally, saying to himself, I respect my audience, but really mean it. Right in front of the eyes near the front and center, saying they feel love. Very sweet.
My name's Ricard, and I want to start off today by having you think of a quick question. When you first started critical thinking, what did you think of? For me, I thought of rationality. In other classes, rationality is often seen as a gold standard of human behavior. In this class, critical thinking was kind of seen as a gold standard of thinking. Passmore, in his essay, described critical thinking not necessarily as a skill, but more of a characteristic, something that is inherent in humans, and something that we need to develop through our lives. This is, for many, a skill. As a society, we often see this as a skill, which I think is very accurate. Critical thinking is necessary in our individual lives for processing information. It's also very necessary in a democratic society where we make decisions not only for our own good, but for the good of others. I want to be able to say that my bullshit detector and my critical thinking skill has increased by a lot over this quarter. The fact is I'm unsure how it has developed. I will go into that more later. But even if it has developed or not, my insight is still valuable to you because we need to understand how others see their own bullshit detectors and their critical thinking skills so we can add that to our own. Today I'll aim to cover 3 different points: authority, what we have learned, / what I know, and also my BS detector. When it comes to authority is a great shortcut in many cases. But shortcuts and established norms is something that we must challenge as a part of critical thinking, according to Passmore. And authority is hard to challenge. We know about the Milgram Experiment, and I personally am very happy that the Milgram Experiment is not allowed to be used these days for ethical reasons. I would not want to be a subject to it. Not only because subjects are often left with emotional scars, but also because our obedience to authority could be scary for ourselves to know. It's easy to say that we are not obedient, but the truth is that in many cases we are.
3 minutes left.
I often disagree with professors at UCLA and other institutions. I often disagree with my parents. I don't necessarily bring these conversations up, my disagreement up. I don't always challenge them, because many times it's proven easier for me to just follow what they say and deal with it, rather than to openly voice my criticism. I spend a lot of time thinking, reading, and talking about politics. Have you ever tried discussing politics with somebody when you have different authority figures? When you can consider different sources authoritative? Personally, I'm a huge fan of The Economist. I have roommates whose #1 source is Fox News. We don't tend to agree on a lot. But it's very important to still question our sources, because only when we do that, we understand why we use them and what are the flaws with them. Because there are costs and benefits to everything. No source is perfect, but some are better than others. In terms of what we know today, what I've learned, I think it's easily described as we know a lot, and we know enough to take a lot of different stances. We saw 9 debates. That's 18 different stances. That was well supported throughout this quarter. Kudos for everyone who took a position and supported it. But that we know so much only increases the importance of our critical thinking and BS detectors. Since you can present evidence for almost anything, we need to know how to look at it, where to challenge it, where to adhere to it. And that is not easy to do. The problem with critical thinking is that improvements can be gradual. There's no way of keeping track how often you use your critical thinking capacity, so it's hard to know how it's developed. The same goes for my bullshit detector. We have different BS detectors in different fields. We have one for personal life and we have one in academia. The academia one I would probably describe as Reagan put it when he was negotiating nuclear arms deals with the Soviet Union. Trust, but verify. We need to be able to trust people who present information, but our main objective should be to verify it before we trust it wholeheartedly. That is something I think we all can develop. That isn't easy in academia, because many models require computer power that we don't have, or giant facilities where you can run simulations, which we don't have. This ties back into authority, and it's hard. So, in the end, I don't know how I've developed. Hopefully time will tell, and show that I've actually did develop more than I think I did. If I didn't, then that means I have even more room to grow in the future, which is good. There are many reasons to improve our BS detectors. As a citizen in a democratic country, I think my duty will be better fulfilled if I'm a critical thinker, and that's one reason I'll aim to improve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that was a very thoughtful presentation, and I think one thing I'd like you to elaborate on is just the point of knowing when to apply it. You know, that's the conundrum. That's the tricky part.
Critical thinking or BS detectors.
Yeah, and where do you apply it? Do you have any wisdom or ideas on that?
I think it's, in general, it should be a starting point.
Yeah.
Then it all depends on who you're talking to and about what. We don't need to be as critical of people telling their own personal stories.
Yeah.
Compared to when they're presenting evidence that's meant to persuade us. When something is meant to persuade us, we have a duty to ourselves to consider that evidence more.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Ricard. Okay, Jennifer is next, and what?
Can I say something?
Yes, yeah.
Everyone, okay, if you haven't handed in
Quiet.
your
Lydia
self-evaluation...
has an announcement. Quiet.
If you haven't handed in your self-evaluation forms yet, just email it to me and make sure you do it like today. And then we can print it out and I can get the hard copy. Also, there's some people who missed out the second part of the evaluation still, so make sure you go and check that you did it. So the first whole part is out of 5 and then the sticky stuff, and then there's a second part with stuff in each of these areas, how did you do? Do you think you won the debate? That stuff. So make sure you've got both parts for all of them, and make sure if you've done 2 debates or how many ever debates, make sure I have one for each, so that you can get credit. Yeah.
We thank Vidya for her hard work.
Yes.
Yes.
So we're doing currently to do a debate class.
Yeah, you're going to do a self-evaluation of this speech you did today.
And are we going to use the same format, or is there a format for this
Speech?
evaluation?
Yeah, there's a 1-page speech evaluation on
Okay.
there. Yes?
Is the same true for the previous speech you did, the last class?
Yeah,
So separate one for this or one for?
One for this one, yeah, separate one for this one. Harry, can you come up here a minute?
If anyone wants to hand it in now, you can. Otherwise, just email it to me. Try to do it by today so that I can grade everything by tomorrow.
Okay.
In the past, you said if we did 2 debates, we only needed to submit for one of them.
Oh, was it one? Alright, fine. Just make sure you write which debates you did. Yeah. No, if I have it, you're good. But if you haven't, or you just want to confirm, or just to be safe, make sure you send it to me, and then I will.
We have 15 minutes. Self-evaluation for this and for the one.
No,
15 minutes.
Yeah. So the ones you submitted last class, if you want to be safe, just give me just email it to me, and then the one for today needs to be yours.
Yeah, okay.
So since this isn't a debate, I don't think, is there a different format for the self-evaluation for this speech?
It's kind of the same thing, except you just have to talk about, like, I could have done this speech
You have
better.
4 minutes, not 5, because we're running out of time.
Yeah, so like rebuttal, for example, is something you're not gonna have. But in general, it's just like, oh, I could have like memorized better.
One step half step back, perfect. Do I have your,
Yes, I just put it
2 pages
there.
For this speech and the last.
I think I do.
okay.
Oh, no, then you skip the part.
Okay, we're beginning, we're running out of time. They're limited to 4 minutes. We'll forego the question. I need to have Tyler Koch on deck. And then Danielle Leatherman. Beautiful name. Okay, begin.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Kim, and I just wanted to start it off with like some personal background. So before taking this class, I really didn't know anything about critical decisions, critical thinking, or argumentation. Coming from a science background, I was almost never exposed to public speaking, let alone debate in front of the entire class. I did not know what to focus on or even look for. I wanted to take this class because I wanted to challenge myself and develop a critical eye. I always thought that I wanted to be good at picking out what is credible, what to believe, and what not to believe. Especially as someone studying science, there are a lot of researches that get lost and never get published because they generate some other results that they're not trying to prove. And these results must be critically analyzed because they can greatly impact the health of the global. Let's say that you really don't want an accurate results in something like a medication that can cure cancer and turn out that it's not. So I wanted to learn how to critically analyze these published researches that may or may not be true and use it for my advantage. So now I'm going to talk about what I learned, focusing on the definition and credibility. So according to the text for this class, argumentation and critical decision making, critical thinking is a personal phase of critical decision making, also referred to as the internal dialogue, and allows us to focus on our individual thinking in order to make critical decisions. I personally believe that the focus of the critical decision is greatly impacted by the credibility of the source. That impacts like what to believe and what not to believe of an individual. Okay. So by arguing in the debate, I had to do a lot of research and pick out the sources that are credible. My critical thinking and BS detector improved so much after this class because I had to choose credible sources to use. Since the topic of the debate was climate change, I needed to focus on the claims and evidences coming from scientists rather than politicians or editors. I found out that even the editors of the science magazines a lot of times are not scientists. Also, even within scientists, I felt like most credible source would be scientists specializing in climate or environmental science, because even the general scientists would not really know about the topic if they don't specialize in the field, just like how I really did not know anything about the climate change before doing some research. Also, I found out that I personally focus a lot on definitions. So for my debate, like I actually focus on the definition of being catastrophic. And even looking at the On Teaching to be Critical by John Passmore, he talks about how critical thinking is not a habit because it diminishes the conscious attention. And he asserts that translating one language to another may be developed as a habit, but not critical thinking. And I agree with Passmore because critical thinking, like I said, is a personal phase and refers to as the internal dialogue. And I believe that critical thinking requires a person to consciously have their own internal dialogue, and cannot become a habit, which diminishes consciousness.
Okay. After going through the debate and speech, writing about journals, and reading on teaching to be critical, in this class I actually developed my own BS detector. I first learned that I need to look at everything critically, know where the evidence is coming from, and if the sources are worth believing or not. I also learned that what I focus the most in looking at the sources and evidence is credibility and the definitional facts. I further need to expand my BS detector by focusing on other things, such as authority or accuracy in the CAP test, to improve on my critical decision making. And I believe that knowing whether the claims and evidences of the opponent or the authority is accurate or not is critical in critical decisions. And in the end, I not only developed my own BS detector, but also improved on it. However, there are still more room to improve. So because I found out, more so because I found out that I actually focus more on the definitional facts, that I actually need to look at the accuracy in the evidences.
Thank you very much. I want to say just one real quick thing that the Milgram Experiment, also impacts all this, so be aware of that. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Tyler, and on deck is Danielle Lederman. I've heard of her. Or keep your heart up, Danielle. Go.
Okay, so my name's Tyler.
Hi, Tyler.
Before this class, I wholeheartedly agreed with the concept of climate change. I really pushed for anything green, and I really didn't question it. But after this class, I realized that I never really critically analyzed or critically thought about any of my beliefs towards climate change. This class has greatly improved the way I go about critically constructing my arguments and also critically analyzing my arguments and the arguments of others. This is definitely significant because being able to apply a critical lens to everyday arguments and situations makes us all better general communicators through our listening skills and through our speaking skills, and being able to re-articulate our critical thought processes for other people to also listen to. So I want to talk about this in 3 main points: what I've learned about my BS detector, how I've applied it in real world scenarios, and also how I continue to improve my BS detector.
Excellent.
So what I've learned in this class, especially through the debates, is how important it is to question evidence and critically analyze evidence, and also not just question it, but reconnect it back to lines of reasoning in policy analysis, like the 8 steps of policy analysis, and just being able to see how evidence connects back to someone's general claim. So I want to give a real world example of how I've applied my BS detector. One of the organizations I work for is currently trying to squash the policy for a desalination project. And going into this, I didn't really know anything about desalination, but a lot of my superiors and authority figures told me that desalination is terrible for the environment, it's really bad. And before taking this class, I probably would have just ran with that information and wholeheartedly believed it. But since I've taken this class, I really question that information. And they asked me to write an article about it. And I referred back to the Milgram Experiment and said, maybe writing this article doesn't necessarily coincide with what I believe. Maybe it's something that's wrong, and they're asking me to do something that's wrong. So I conducted a lot of independent research and started questioning the evidence that they provided me and questioning multiple sources of evidence, different spheres of evidence, to figure out what I actually thought about desalination. And I found out that my authority figures had actually exaggerated a lot of the different claims about desalination, and I figured, yeah, it's still bad for the environment, but it's not as bad as we thought. So,
good.
I think we can all continue to improve our BS detectors by kind of involving ourselves in multiple spheres of thoughts And I think this class is a really good example of just how that works to improve our BS detectors. To refer to Passmore, just to paraphrase what Passmore said in his essay, there has to be a kind of give and take when we're arguing. Everyone has to be held accountable for their position, and teachers should be subject to critical analysis, and so should their students. Like, you can be critically thoughtful on your own, but it helps to have two people involved in this debate. It kind of takes two to tango in this kind of scenario. So in summary, I think these real world scenarios require a lot of critical thought processes that we've learned in class. And to tie this back to my thesis, I think the class in general has allowed me to be a better thinker and communicator in these real world scenarios. So in conclusion, I think we can all continue to improve our BS detector by questioning provided evidence, exposing ourselves to different spheres of thought, and being able to create and live in these conducive atmospheres of critical thought.
Was your article published?
No, I'm still working on it.
Thank you.
Is that it?
That's it, yeah. Next on deck will be Pratik, the coffee man. Okay, go, man, go. Step forward. Right there, 1.5 step back. Perfect. Okay, Danielle stands before you. Close your computer, LC. Communicating respect non-verbally, finding friendly eyes near the front and center. Say your name, feel the love. Better people.
My name is Danielle.
Hi, Danielle.
Hi. So Professor Miller offered the definition of critical thinking as the following: the mental process of going about knowing what to do or what to believe. But here at the end of class, I don't think that it's absurd or unintelligent to state that critical thinking often leads to not knowing what to do and not knowing what to believe. So before explaining how my BS detector has changed, I want to discuss two fundamental foundations within this class that help to highlight issues with my own critical thinking and my own BS detector. The first, which is one that I already talked about, was how I cited the IPC as a credible and reliable source of information when in fact a lot of their reports are actually manipulated. So in this way, it showed me that my BS detector is broken. And further, I think that it also showed us that authority figures, it doesn't really matter how accomplished, recognized, or praised they are, they're not immune to questioning of others, and expertise in one field does not necessarily transfer into another. And then the second problem was how I decided that I believed in climate change, and it wasn't necessarily a product of independent thought or analysis, but more so mindless adoption from my authority leaders in my life. So I'm actively working to change my BS detector in two ways: one with application and two in mindset. So one of the Passmore quotes that I thought was super surprising was he stated that critical thinking is not just a habit, and it's not just the practice of asking questions. So in this way, I've changed the application of my BS detector with 3 adoptions. The first one, to seek out concrete facts rather than just subjective opinions, and that means checking the potential bias of sources, as well as looking at the relation of the source to the topic that you're discussing as a part of the CRAP test. We saw in class how the credibility of economists was called to question when talking about global warming. Secondly, to question the assumptions and preconceived values passed on by authority leaders, such as in the Milgram Experiment, which demands both courage and open-mindedness. And third, and most importantly, to conduct self-reflection on values or opinions which we hold dearly. And whereas you might not necessarily change them, you will develop a better understanding of why you so closely believe these values, and even more importantly, how to defend these in the face of questioning by others, or as Passmore calls it, producing the relevant kind of ground. So to conclude with how my BS detector has changed my mindset, I think one of the most important takeaways for me from this class is that critical thinking is not just a sort of one and done step. It's not a neat, orderly checklist that you can go download off of CCLE. And it involves active honing and development, demanding courage, attention, and concentration both inside and outside of the classroom.
Excellent.
And this is a self-motivated trait. This is not something that someone else can start or maintain for you. So to summarize and tie back to the rest of my life, through class readings, Passmore's work, watching class debates, doing my own research and self-reflection, I'm leaving this class with a change in both application and mindset of my BS detector, as well as my critical thinking trait. And as Passmore states, it is not absurd to suggest that the critical attire, once aroused, may extend beyond the particular group of problems which it first provoked. Thank you.
Thank you. And Milgram, big issue to you or not really?
When I saw the Milgram Experiment, I thought of the Stanford Prison Experiment, and both of them seem absolutely ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
But if I was one of the subjects, and if one of my parents was up there, I would probably go 5 to 10 minutes before questioning them, just because I have inherent trust for my parents as authority leaders, if that makes sense.
So you know that your parents maybe have given you some beliefs that you didn't question.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you. Okay, Pratik is on deck, and next we'll hear from Cole Martinez is on the hot seat. Do we have a timer?
Haley's.
Who?
Haley.
Callie?
Haley.
Kaylee.
Haley.
Oh, Haley. Good. Okay, rock and roll.
Alright, so before I begin my speech and go about critical thinking and what and 3 points that I'll be making, I'd just like to start off with a story about myself in an accounting class. Being an econ and an accounting student, what I learned from these classes was we were told to believe what our professors told us because these were concepts that were developed over time, and as a result, in one specific accounting class when I asked one of my finance professors why this specific model was created in a way to analyze the stock markets, he was like, well, that's the way it is, you should just follow it. Having done that, I realized after a while that while I accepted it initially, I then started to think about the question, why is it that we do something, as opposed to like what it is and how it should be done. I think that one question about why we should do something really sparked the interest of why we should be critical thinkers, is questioning why is something and what is the impact of that. So that leads me to defining and overall characterizing what critical thinking overall means for me. While the formal definition of that, as stated within the prompt, might be in terms of what to do and what to believe in, I think on a much more colloquial and a personal level, it's really an introspection of the certain ideas that we hold valuable to each other and how we reflect upon those ideas and then are able to convey those ideas to others. That does not necessarily mean people have to agree with them, but it's the fact that we are able to analyze that concretely, give evidence for that, and then present it to a particular certain audience. And in my life, critical thinking has largely come out in competitive debating. It's not so much about talking to an audience and trying to convince them. It's much more about getting an issue, thinking about it for 15 minutes and delivering a 7-minute speech, trying to win that debate. And if I lose, then my thoughts weren't as good. So based on my previous experience, this class rather changed my experience, and as a result allowed me to gain an added perspective of what critical thinking might be. Because here we were, in a way, encouraged to talk to an audience and really convince them and gain their adherence on the topics that we debated. So what have I learned based from this? So after talking about what I've learned, I'll be talking about what do we know now, and the last thing I'll be going over is how has my BS detector evolved. So after having done the value debates, it really opened my eyes on what critical thinking might be. Having gone into that speech, I really did not know what politicization of science really meant. So after having done that sort of research and really analyzing that thing, I realized that I was able to gain a foundational understanding of the topic. And this really surprised me because it related me to John Passmore's essay on how to be critical and on teaching on how to be critical, because he talks about a point about how critical thinkers require that independence, that initiative, and that courage in order to propose their own ideas. And that's what I felt when I researched the topic on politicizing science, because I had to have that initiative and that independence. At the same time, I was able to not assume authority and believe whatever they had, because although I was on the opposition side, I tried to contest the ideas that they had. While I might have lost the debate, I at the end of the day realized that challenging authority in that sphere is important. So what do we know now? Based on that, I learned that climate change is something that is definitely real, but at the same time, there are gray areas that cover it based on the debates that we've had. So having learned about climate change and overall nature, I realized that it's important to have that sort of BS detector. And that at the end of the day, I was able to really differentiate between arguments that were not as well foundationally developed, or sometimes that were did not have as much strong evidence. Having had that sort of BS detector, I now know confidently that I can go out and really tell between different arguments which one really stands against which one. But having said that, there are definitely ways to develop that sort of BS detector. We can look at personal qualities of a particular speaker, their voice intonations, their overall modulation to really attest on how their overall argumentation really is. So in summary, having had that experience as an econ and accounting student, I realized that I had to be a critical thinker in asking the why question, and at the end of the day, really understand what critical thinking meant, challenging that authority, and gaining that foundational understanding. And that's what this class really helped me achieve.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the story that you told. I think it gave us all an added dimension to your presentation. Thank you, Pratik. Go. And on deck is Brett Nagy. Brett N.
Before I start, I just want to say that because of the time constraints, I might skip around a little bit just to get
Free country.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
So for my essay, I'll be talking about what I've learned and what values you can take from this class, as well as how to expand my BS detector. So to start, I took this class because I wanted to, after college, I want to graduate, I want to go to law school. And I thought principles of argumentation would be a valuable class to take. Now, originally when I came to this class and I heard they had to do debates and you had to talk about climate change, I was quite concerned because I knew very little about both these topics. But overall, after taking this class, I'm very happy that I took it because now I have a very in-depth knowledge about both sides of climate change as well as how to research and run a debate. I wanted to start my speech with a quote from John Passmore. He says, "To call a person critical is to characterize them and describe his nature." Now, after taking this class, I think I can call myself critical because I no longer readily just accept information that I hear in casual conversation, but instead I challenge the merit of what they're saying and look at the evidence. And this can be seen an example in the movies we watched. We watched the Inconvenient Truth and the Great Global Warming Swindle. I had never seen the Inconvenient Truth before, and after I had seen it, I was convinced, wow, global warming is a huge problem. How are we not trying to battle this? And then at the end, Professor Miller had said, now what scientists he had credited, and I was blown away that none of the scientists had been named, that I had been so believing in what Al Gore had said, and he hadn't even presented any actual evidence. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have the Great Global Warming Swindle, where they're just throwing you at pounding you with information, and you just get so overwhelmed. You're like, wow, these are a lot of facts. How can I not believe this side? And I did a journal on the fallacies of both, and I was so surprised to see how they had started using this correct information and manipulated it to really just twist and back up their claims. And then on another point that I want to make that I was able to expand my BS detector on was the questioning from Professor Miller. I've been in a lot of classes where the teachers just talk at you, and you don't really get a chance to really think. You're just kind of just hanging out and zoning out basically because they're not really interesting. But Professor Miller really just makes sure you guys are everyone's truly thinking because we have to participate for our grade. So everyone has to come up with something interesting and stay in tune in discussion, which makes you constantly critically thinking. Another thing that was huge was after the debates, you had to give your critiques and advice. I have improved exponentially from these kind of critiques because not only does everyone have to say something unique than the person before them, but it causes everyone to be critically thinking about your debate, and it's just an overall positive environment to expand your critical thinking. Another step was the journals, because the journals actually, they take the textbook and they make you apply them to real life scenarios. I wasn't aware that how helpful it would be for me to see, because credibility is actually a very important part of daily life and debating in every public speech. And you can see that in the specific journal of 24 hours without giving a reasoning. You have to, when I wasn't able to give reasons why I couldn't do something, people were awfully suspicious, and they really doubted my credibility of why and just thought I was being a flake or whatnot. So it really goes to show how you can apply the things we learn in class to everyday life. And overall, I would say my BS detector has improved exponentially from this class. I'm able to now not only just look at information that's given to me, but quickly look through a different lens and analyze it through the different methods we've learned in this class. So overall, I'm very happy that I took it and I've learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the comments. Brett, and then Kiara Knoppenberger, another beautiful name. Savor it. Are you thinking of shortening it?
Oh, my family and I've had that thought a lot, but we've
Oh,
never
really?
actually done it.
It could be called Knop. Knop.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay, rock and roll, Mr. Brett.
Hi, I'm Brett.
Hi, Brett. Ooh, Brett. Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I gotta do something. No. You'll be on the wall. I'll do something. Okay, good. Okay, you'll be fine.
Alright, so first I'm going to do like a little intro, then talk about how authority figures affect our beliefs, and talk about the BS detector, and then give like a takeaway. So I first enrolled in this class because I knew I was passionate about arguing and debating, and I wanted to like test myself to see where I really stood. And so like on the first day of class, when I came in and like, the topic was climate change, I was underwhelmed because I had zero interest in it. And so, but I don't quit easily, so I wanted to like challenge myself and to see if I could argue passionately about something that I was not passionate about, and that maybe like as I argued for it, and as I like put my effort in, if I would become passionate about it, just through giving it my all. So I decided, that's what I would do. And so when it was time to sign up for debate topics, I wanted to challenge myself. So I looked online, and the politicization of science had 80%, 79% against saying the politicization of science was desirable. So I figured arguing on the affirmative would be the more challenging part. So that's what I did. As for the majority of people who grant adherence to their authority figures, they essentially like see people as more knowledgeable than them, and then they like that combined with some like qualification like a degree causes them to trust that person, and then once they trust that person, all like critical analysis and questioning goes out the window, and obedience is what remains. And that is illustrated in Milgram's Obedience Experiment, where it was initially designed to show that what happened in Germany could never happen in the United States, that Americans were just inherently better, or America in general just didn't produce those type of people. But then what it found was that once people saw knowledgeable experts, doctors, as authority figures, they obeyed and just did whatever they were told. And this connects to John Passmore's on teaching to be critical, when he says that a critical person must possess independence and courage. So you can't just, if you just naturally go through life thinking that you won't do something passively, then you won't. You will do it. You'll just obey. You have to purposefully question everything and go through the steps. So over the course of the quarter, we've been taught to question everything and everyone. I'd like to amend that a little based off Frank's speech, where he said only when you're interested in something or when it significantly affects you. I agree with that. And so we've learned that each individual has different like assumptions and values and stuff like that prior to their debate topic. So I think it's very important to like tailor your debate to their, once you deduce their assumptions, then to tailor the debate to that, and to doesn't matter how great your argument is, facts and logic, if they go based off like rainbows and butterflies. So my BS detector has been pretty much on full throttle since I was a kid, but this class gave it like a shot of adrenaline, and it really made me reemphasize like how important like body language and tone of voice, because it's really easy to tell when someone I think like Natalie said, that it's really easy to tell when they just don't believe what they're saying. And then, so overall, I really enjoyed my time in this class, and I think I could have done a lot better job at really understanding how my audience's perspective beforehand, before structuring my argument, and maybe like connecting it to their belief system. And so I look forward to structuring my argument and putting myself in each person's shoes before I structure my argument. Thank you.
Good, yeah. Well, yeah, audience analysis was something that we tried to stress, but you can't stress everything and get a good job on everything. But you're right, that's an important element of argumentation to get optimal adherence. Okay, Kiara Knoppenberger. Arun is on the hot seat, followed by Julia. Okay, begin.
Hi everyone, my name is Kiara.
Hi Kiara.
On teaching to be critical, John Passmore states that a person cannot be drilled into appreciating a poem, nor can a person be drilled into being critical. When I read this quote and then read the rest of the article, I came to two major realizations in my life. One is that my early years of schooling really did not do enough to enhance and inspire critical thinking. And two, now I think critical thinking, especially having been in this class, is really important, and we all should strive to apply it throughout our lives as we try to make well thought out conclusions about the things around us. So I thought these were two basic ideas that I could base my speech and paper off of. But as I was writing my paper, I was about halfway through, and I came to a third realization, which is that I was doing the exact opposite of being critical. I was taking what Passmore was saying and not thinking about it in a critical way at all. You see, I read all those 10 pages. I even highlighted the quotes that I really liked, but not once did I stop to question his credibility as an author, the veracity of his statements and evidence, or how his personal values might be influencing what he's saying, which we have learned is... Thank you. Which we have learned, is an important part in identifying someone's support, as shown in the textbook. So where was my BS detector that I was supposed to have developed after 10 weeks in this class? Well, I would like to blame it maybe on being stressed about finals, but really I think it's the very nature of our BS detector. You see, I believe that our BS detectors are like on and off switches. You know, as much as I'd like to say that at the end of this class, my BS detector is on, like full throttle, like Brett said, but it's not. It's really a conscious decision that I have to make in that moment to want to be critical and have a critical mentality of what I'm looking at. So this is the main thing that I learned about this class, and realizing that my BS detector and my ability to be critical is more of a conscious effort than I thought it was originally has actually been a very good thing, because I thought I was a good critical thinker unconsciously and all the time when, you know, before this class, but really that's not true. I have to commit myself to wanting to be critical and commit myself to looking at the potential BS that is in an argument. So what do I know now? I know that, one, the environment that I'm in, which, like, for example, this class, is a really big impact on my ability to be critical. I came into this class every week, twice a week, knowing that Professor Miller wanted us to be critical and to question things around us. So I knew that I had to turn on my BS detector and be, you know, critical of the statements being made in the debates and also in the films that we were watching. I tried to apply this in my policy debate, because when my partner and I exchanged our briefs with those in the class, the first thing I did was tell myself that I need to be critical, and I looked at their sources and fact-checked, and it actually served beneficial because I was able to find some miscommunications and, you know, misinformations that served to boost my credibility as not just a researcher, but also as a debater in this class. So overall, I've learned that I need to treat my life in general like I've treated this class, and, you know, convince myself to be in that critical mindset as much as I can. But obviously there's so much information out there that it's difficult to do that, but I really need to, we all really need to strive and apply this conscious effort of being critical throughout our lives. And as far as how this class has expanded my BS detector, I don't think it has expanded it more than it has made me aware that I need to be conscious of how I think and question what's around me. So as I stated earlier, Passmore said that we cannot be drilled to be critical, to think critically, but instead I think that we should all come together and think about the things around us and be able to put ourselves in the most optimal position of being critical of the statements around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiara. We're out of time, so we're just going to move on to the next person. Thank you. On deck will be Julia. On deck will be Carolina. Oh, another 0. On deck will be Justin. See here?
Yes.
Justin Ruiz. Okay. Okay, over that way. Come forward. That way. Forward. Wait a minute. Back half step. Yeah. Okay, start.
The brain, perhaps the most vital organ. Use it or you will lose it. As cited by acclaimed and accredited author John Passmore, the brain is essential in order to learn how to critically think. But before I go into the concept of critical thinking, let me take you back just 3 years ago. Back in my heyday when I participated in high school debate. Now the version of debate I participated in was known as Congressional Debate. It was a free-for-all. And in any given tournament, we would be given up to 24 topics. And very contrary to what I experienced in this class, those 24 topics involved just rudimentary research. And after those 24 topics were done, they were thrown away and 24 new topics were presented. But in this class, after going through thorough 9 debates, research, documentaries, and lectures by Professor Miller, I've come to understand of a more comprehensive and understanding of what it means to be a critical thinker and what I have gained from insights, and also how my BS detector has evolved and has expanded over the course of this quarter. Now, John Passmore, in his book, fundamentally establishes that being critical is fundamentally different than being questioning. He essentially states that being critical necessitates a shared experience of opinions, not only whether they be consistent opinions, but also divisive opinions. And that's what ultimately fosters progress, as John Passmore suggests. And one example can be taken from a personal example and an empirical example. Just a few months ago, when a fan of mine, a conservative pundit, Ben Shapiro, went to Berkeley to speak, he was shut down by the campus police because of protests by Antifa. Very ironically, Antifa was protesting the ability for free speech, and by other Berkeley students. But before he was shut down, there was in fact productive and critical thinking that was going on during his questionnaire. But after it was shut down, it was just simply counterproductive. And that's what I sort of learned. In order to be a critical thinker, you need to be comprehensive in all sides of the argument in order to get to a full understanding. But that moves on to my next point, and sort of my BS detector and how it has evolved throughout the course of this quarter. And my BS detector initially was pretty weak, I would say. One example I can give was just maybe 9 months ago. It was amidst applying for internships for this upcoming summer. And I had a phone interview with the NAACP branch in DC. And I asked them, is this a rolling admission cycle process? And they blatantly said no. But because of my appeal to authority, and I simply just believed what they said. But then I did the same thing 3 days ago, and I called the University of Michigan Law Admission Office to see if their application is rolling. And they said the same exact thing. No, it's not a rolling process. But this time, after evolving through this course, my BS detector was able to not only comprehensively look at all the information pertinent, but also not only appeal to the authority, but question the authority that told me that. So as a result, I went to the website of the University of Michigan Law Admissions. And I found out that in fact it was a rolling admission process. If you applied earlier in the process, then you did have a better chance of admission. So over the course of these 10 weeks and through multiple documentaries, I have learned a couple of insights. That not only is climate change and climate science inherently politicized, but also that critical thinking requires a diverse and an accompaniment of opinions, not just a singular opinion. So in conclusion, I came away from this class with many insights, and I have improved my BS detector and have expanded it to multiple uses, which I will be sure to use in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Justin and then Jacob. Are you Justin? Yes. Praise the Lord. Is Jacob in the house?
Yes, sir.
Get on the hot seat. Rock and roll, sir.
Start. Hey everybody, I'm Justin.
Hi, Justin.
So today I'm going to tell you about how my BS detector has evolved, aka the evolution of my BS detector. And I'm going to go through the three points that Professor Miller wanted us to go through, which is what we've learned, what I do now, and how my BS detector has evolved. So basically, what I've learned about this is a lot about the BS detector goes by presentation. Like for me personally, I didn't do that well of a job with the presentation, and I think that really helps with your credibility, also in two ways. One, because you're more knowledgeable on the subject, and two, because you're just more confident about it. So with knowledge comes more confidence. So basically, I could have improved by being more confident. I was just like looking at my paper because I didn't know what else to say, and if I was more knowledgeable on the subject, I would be able to just cite them by just saying like whatever was on my mind for that.
Or from memory, yeah.
From memory.
Yeah.
From memory. And then 3 minutes left. Also, I think that the citations is a big deal when you're talking about about subjects. I'm guilty of this as well. I do talk about subjects and I just say, oh yeah, blah 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 blah, without saying any like background or saying where I got this from. A lot of people, what I notice is they can take out of context from the citations, and it's really important to look at these citations and to not only study them, but to make sure they're not put out of context. And this leads to my next topic. What do I do now? So basically what I just said, what we do now is we further check our citations, and we also make sure that in corporations, it goes through the CRAP test, which was currency and relevance. What we do now is obviously you're gonna be checking the relevance. You're obviously gonna be checking the currency. And what happened with me was, usually I take orders from authority. This goes back to the journals. And what I would do was, I would just like believe whoever's an authoritative figure. When in fact, a lot of these authoritative figures actually wing it. One instance in particular is, let's say a microbiologist is studying cancer cells, and they only know about cancer cells. Just because they're a microbiologist doesn't mean they know everything about microbiology. Like in this instance, they only know the most about cancer cells. So that's why you can't just assume that authoritative figure just because they've studied this one subject that they're gonna automatically know all the umbrella terms under that subject. And my next topic was, how has the BS detector evolved? Before stepping into this class, I'm definitely not a debater. Even in high school, I never did any kind of debating. I'm more on the STEM side. And I think that coming into this class, it really like broadened my horizon in a sense where like I can think more critically on like politics, and because preferably I did the policy debate, and the policy debate basically showed me how the implementation, how it can be effective, how it can be useful, and if it's critically catastrophic or not. I think that with our specific policy debate, reducing carbon emissions, I think that it was definitely useful and relevant, and it helped me realize that if it was really relevant or not by the opposition. They were saying some really good points about how the policy was iffy, it would cost a lot of money, and I think that as long as the cost benefit analysis like goes through and there's more benefit than bad, then it'd definitely be a lot more beneficial. And I think that overall my BS detector was bad in the beginning, but it's at a greater spot than it was, and I think it will continue to evolve as I get older.
Thank you very much, Justin. Okay, Jacob Scott, and then Sirat Safa, and then Nilu. Begin, Mr. Scott Jacob Scott.
Right. So
is Sirat Safa here? Oh wait, bathroom break.
I think she like got us with the A through D choices. Like I think like if it was like A through D, it would be like a little bit better given to her. The A through D is like
take off. No, take off. I don't want this pressure on you. A lot of pressure over you.
Honestly, you were there for me. It's only fair when they're for me.
That's fair.
I think that. I just want you to memorize.
I'll memorize it right now. Hey, can you be friendly eyes for me when I look out? Thank you. I gotta have some friends in this life. Huh? Trust your audience?
Don't forget to do yourself
That's still enough, you know.
It's not bad, but
yeah.
someone who's still, it was just irritating and like their rating on it didn't.
Okay. Thank you. Very much. Good call, yeah. Keep talking. Will they get up here without me? Or are you known there? Okay. We'll all walk in mass and after Mr. Scott Jacob. Could you stand forward and right there, yeah. Okay, Mr. Jacob Scott, tell us about critical thinking.
So let me take everyone back to March 2016. 2 years ago, I just got word that I got accepted into an internship for a political magazine in New York City. Right? It was pretty exciting for me. Way underqualified and just absolutely out of my league here. But I was excited nonetheless. New York City, you know, I'm not going to doubt it. Like, if they accept me, joke's on them, I'll be there. So my big thing was things I was scared about. Apartment was a big thing. So, of course, went to the classic websites, Craigslist, you know, apartments.com, always reliable sources, right?
Yeah.
And I saw these amazing apartments, like these one bedroom in middle of Manhattan, you know, for $800. And so I'm like, oh, I'm gonna be living so well there. So sent out a few emails, got some responses back. I was ecstatic. They were like, I'm a doctor, I have to go to Africa to be the chief surgeon there. Perfect timing. I'll be leaving the day you get there, so you know you can move in with no worries. So I was like, oh, this is awesome. So I told my parents that, and they said this is a scam, and I didn't believe them. So what I ultimately found out was it was a scam, and that's when I came to the brutal conclusion that I was naive and I wouldn't believe anything anyone told me, and that my BS detector was severely underdeveloped. So when I signed up for this class and you mentioned the BS detector, I realized that I said definitely something I need to work on. And through the class and the debates,
it really helped me further my critical thinking in BS Detector because I realized the importance of 3 characteristics of the debate that were extremely important, and that is credible sources, delivery, and road mapping. So in every debate, after the first one, I believed everything in the first one. I thought everything was, hunky-dory. Everyone wouldn't use bad sources, but that was pretty stressed in the next debate, so I kind of kept an eye on that and realized that even researching my own debate, I could have used so many bad sources that would help my argument, but if they were questioned, my entire credibility would come into question. Even the credible sources I used would be questioned. So I had to realize that sources were extremely valuable in that. And then the second thing was their delivery. So in every debate, I was able to agree more with people that were, approachable. They weren't just reading off a sheet like I'm doing up here. They weren't just resuscitating facts. They were presenting them in a manner that I could understand. And I hate to say it, but they had to dumb it down for me. And anyone that was able to dumb down a subject like climate change showed they understood it. They really were knowledgeable in the subject, and that gave me much more confidence in their case. So the third thing is road mapping. So if they didn't show me where exactly they're going with the argument, I'd be in the back of class, kind of like midway through the debate, not knowing where it's going. What if I zoned out for a minute? I'd be lost, right? So they had to give a step-by-step guide, and I was so much more likely to follow it to completion. Because 7 minutes, attention span nowadays is very short, so 7 minutes is a while to stay zoned in and really focus. That was another thing. So my experience in New York completely changed my life. No money was exchanged, just so everyone knows, and those scams. But what was exchanged was just a realization that I was naive. And my experience in this class took that realization a step farther, helped me further develop my BS detector, and taught me how to argue more efficiently and meet other people's BS detectors. And that is the most valuable thing I got from this class.
Thank you, Mr. Scott Jacob. We're now going to retire to the Communication Studies conference room. So follow me, young rhetoricians.
I think I did really good on that, where I felt really strong in
No, there's not a recommendation section.
Yeah.
But if there was any way that you could
Give you a boost. Yeah.
Sure, I know. I probably.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Can you talk to me later today or something?
I'm actually going home.
You're leaving. You're leaving. Come on, get in.
Yeah, it was like 5 months that patient test last, and she's like, I'll definitely curve if it.
Oh, got her.
That was intended.
Did we kill you?
So I'm going to work from here.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
I do have.
How are your grades? You have your phone on me? Okay, how are your grades? Good?
Yeah. I didn't know if there was a possibility, but I thought I would mention it.
I'll talk to somebody
I
on
think
the
I thought I
committee,
told
see
her
if
because I remember she
see
posted
what I can
something
do.
and you were
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
I also wanted to invite you to join this debate team if you haven't considered it.
Yeah, I definitely consider it. I don't have any experience in debate prior to
Yeah,
this.
that's okay, but you've been very good. We'll teach you how to do it. But you've been very good. We meet Tuesday and Thursdays at 6 in Bunch Hall 1221. That's the geography building.
Yeah, but I can definitely, I am heading to work from here, but I will, if texting or calling works better than emailing for you.
Yeah, she was saying that.
Try calling me. Yeah,
Okay.
texting doesn't work very well, yeah. Yeah, so, yeah.
So just so we can talk about the debate team and my
Yeah.
interest in it.
Yeah, okay, yeah. That's good, okay.
Whole too. It's not just gonna be like you know, like
I need the key to the conference room.
The small one?
Yeah, small one.
I think there is a
Test?
student who's taking a test right
Try to get the big one then.
I have to.
Thank you.
So anyways, I'm so sorry I have to go back to San Diego
Okay,
right now
so
to
go
work.
give that to
I will.
Nita.
But I just want to thank you for a great 2 quarters because I really enjoyed.
Okay, well, I enjoyed having you as a student. You were a perfect
Thank you.
student. You were very
Thank
good.
you.
I loved your enthusiasm.
If like you need help with any of the class stuff in the future, I'd love to help in
Yeah,
any way.
good. Okay,
or-
good. Well, come. I always need help with
Okay.
our endowment, so come and give me a call.
Yeah, I will. I'll definitely just call you. But thank you so
Thank
much. I really
Okay, you're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
Yeah,
I will hand
well.
this to one of them outside.
Thank you. Avon calling. Avon calling. You like your little ring? Hey, perfect. That's nice. It's open.
we don't have this reserved, so this is something that is reserved.
Yeah, I need to finish a final. Could you do this elsewhere if possible? You're so sweet. Thank you. That's kind of you. I have 15 speeches to finish. Yeah.
So let's.
Thank you. Okay, come in, quickly. Okay.
Professor, by the way, I have Imani's paper. She couldn't make it because she was sick, but I have her paper.
Her paper? What do you mean her paper?
Like the written part of the final.
When's she gonna do it orally?
She said she was gonna email you because she just wasn't feeling well enough to come see.
Okay, good.
Here's your coffee.
Thank you so much. Okay. Coming in.
That'd be so cool. Wait, Professor, do you have the old individual debate reports? Or no?
Yes.
Okay. Because I didn't print out a third copy.
Of what?
The policy one that I'm doing after this.
Okay.
Because some people have to do their
Yeah.
individual.
Okay, well, this. Okay, who is on my list? Thank you for alerting me to this.
Yeah, the time.
Good thing we got over here. This guy was sitting there shooting the breeze with her. He wasn't doing shit. So that was good. Okay, take away that chair. That's your podium. Let me stand in the middle of the table. Yeah. Would you?
Yeah. And then is it 4 minutes?
It's 4 minutes, yeah. Cause you stand, yeah, it is really bright. Let me see if I can do anything.
Yeah.
Okay, good, that's better. Okay, go over that way. We're getting a sheen off that screen, so if you hit that light there, would you?
Sure.
Yeah. Let's see, yeah. Hit the screen. Hold on. Hold on.
So you don't see me.
Yeah, let me try it. Oh, why don't we speak over here? Yeah.
That's a wonderful idea.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's have some audience over here. Yeah. Let's have some audience over here. Yeah.
Should I move over?
Yeah,
like,
stand right about right there, right in the middle of that board. Yeah. Come this way, SCH. Yeah. Okay, that's very nice. Yes. Okay. Excuse me, Elsie. Elsie Camerlingo. Do I have your paper? Who am I on? Sirach.
It's right over there.
That's my Sarah.
Sure.
Sure. Just don't call me late for dinner. Okay, good. Yeah. Just take more that way out. And move that big ugly eraser. Put it to the ground. Just put it on the ground, yeah. Yeah, that's perfect. Now you're perfect, yeah. Okay, And you'll be, come on in and sit over here, folks. Yeah.
There's an extra cup of coffee if anyone wants.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you again for doing that, Coach. Did you clean up over there?
Yeah, clean up.
Thank you. Okay, good, yeah. Okay, all right, so, talk to me about critical thinking and your BS detector, etc.
Alright, so Alright, so growing up, I was a gullible child. If someone told me something, I accepted it as fact, and I just took and I granted adherence to what they said. My mindset at the time was like, why would someone lie? So what they're saying is probably true. And obviously having that mindset led me to believing a lot of bullshit. I had viewed people and their intentions in a black and white manner, instead of considering the gray area that must be navigated as a critical thinker. Throughout high school and college, I thought I had developed critical thinking skills. However, now having gone through this class, I see that, and going through the process of preparing a debate, writing journals, reading the text, I learned what it means to think critically. I learned the huge roles that authority figures play in my life. And I've also learned how to expand my BS detector. So firstly, it's important to explain what it means to think critically. The term is often thrown around and to define some skill that college students should possess. But until sitting in this class, I didn't know what critical thinking entailed. And the textbook and lecture taught me that critical thinking is really a mini debate you carry with yourself. In other words, it is an internal dialogue in which you must apply critical tests, reflect on what you are doing, and try to open your mind to the potential weaknesses in your position while truly looking for other and better ways of thinking. So learning this definition was important because I had to take a look at different arguments both in the classroom and outside of the classroom regarding global warming to see if I was applying these components of critical thinking to the given arguments. When watching the videos in class and preparing for my debate, I quickly learned that I was faced with roadblocks, primarily the fact that I accepted the words of authority figures with little to no questions. I realized that I wasn't thinking critically when assessing an argument because I found myself being swayed by both an inconvenient truth and the great global warming swindle, and I was unsure what my stance is because they both seemed like credible sources of authority on the matter. So I was just stuck because I wasn't sure like which side to go with. And after watching the Milgram Experiment and writing my journal on authority, I realized that my roadblocks were these institutions of education that I never questioned as authority figures. At first, I thought my parents and a few of my peers served as authority figures, but then I realized that some of the strongest and main authority figures in my life were my teachers and the schools I attended. Growing up, I was supposed to accept what my teachers told me without question, and because they were in a qualified position, I thought obviously I have to accept what they say. At times, it was viewed as disrespectful to question them or have doubts about what they were saying. I realized that I had grown up being taught by people who John Passmore would call indoctrinators and not educators. He writes that the fundamental difference between an educator and an indoctrinator is that the indoctrinator treats all rules as inherent in the nature of things, as not even conceivably bad rules. What he takes to be fact, a principle, or presents as a person or work to be admired, is defied as beyond the reach of rational criticism. I learned that my teachers were a lot of these indoctrinators, as opposed to being an educator, who welcomes criticisms, is prepared to admit that he does not always know the answers to them. Essentially, because I was used to accepting the word of authority, my teachers, I was stuck when presented with two differing arguments, because both sources had academic credentials and seemed in a position of academic authority over me. So this was obviously a huge misconception I had coming into the class, because I wasn't using my BS detector to be critical of my primary source of academic knowledge, my educators. And thankfully, through taking this class, I now see how important it is to assess claims presented in an argument based on its support, which is its evidence, values, and credibility, not because the person who's saying it has a degree or the title. As such, my BS detector has evolved because I've learned what it means to be a critical thinker. I learned the relationship I had with authority, one that I wasn't unaware of, and I have faced the challenge of questioning my authorities and only granting adherence to their arguments after thinking critically and evaluating their support.
That's time. Sorry.
Can I just go, because we have 4 to 5 minutes. I'll conclude really quick.
Are we gonna give everybody 5 minutes? Is that gonna ruin anybody's life? Okay, the group says
It's
you can finish.
10 seconds. It's literally just to wrap up. Now that so I will continue to expand. I will continue to expand the use of my BS detector by applying these concepts and lessons I've learned in this class to other areas, whether it's academic pursuits or social pursuits. And now that I reflect on what I learned in this class, I am happy to note the tangible growth that I've experienced. I'm far from being that gullible child who believed everything she was told, and I'm no longer the high school student or college student that thought she knew what it meant to be a critical thinker.
Good.
And I have learned the steps, and I've challenged my ideas, and now I hope to apply what I've learned in order to continue to grow as a critical thinker and a BS detector. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, Nilu, followed by Derek Taylor. You can sit back there till you get your turn. Nilu, a little bit that way, right there. A little bit more that way. Yeah, perfect. Nilu's paper is here. Yes, good girl. Okay. Okay. Nilu, talk to me about critical thinking, please.
So growing up, I grew up super cultural, so you weren't really allowed to ask questions. Whatever was said was what was said. You didn't question it. So when first coming into this class, it was to improve my public speaking, as I've taken other courses with Professor Miller.
What the fuck was that?
I kept leaning on it. I'll pick it up in a bit.
She broke the bar.
Okay. One of the problems I noticed that I had when giving oral presentations is that I have a tendency to speak ridiculously quick, like I am right now. I try to get in as many words as possible at an alarming rate. This is a major issue as the audience may not be able to follow me, therefore the credibility of my speech is not that great and can be impaired due to this. Another issue that I wanted to address that was was that when speaking, I would not enunciate all my words. This is something that I have fixed with after my first debate. I now pronounce all my words clearly and stress the words that I believe need the most attention. This could be words or numbers or alarming statistics that I want the audience to remember. This was shown through the end of my first debate as the fact that the opposition only had one piece of evidence, and I kept bringing that up throughout the debate, which ultimately gave myself more credibility as I have appeared to be more knowledgeable. I've learned a lot from this class. Coming in, I did not know much about global warming or climate change. It was always this topic that I brushed off because I knew it was going to open a can of worms. Anytime this arose, it would end up in a large debate over who's correct and the evidence to back it up. So my BS detector over time has been better. When first coming into this class, I wasn't sure exactly what to believe or who to believe, as I believe it was within the first or second week of class when we watched Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. I believed everything about that was correct because it's Al Gore, and since he was running for president, you know, they do extensive background checks, and he seemed knowledgeable enough to run for presidency, therefore why should I not trust him with my own thoughts and beliefs? So coming out after that movie, I thought it was great. I believed everything. This is a huge issue. After Professor spoke about it a bit more, I realized that this is an issue, and all the facts that he said were not necessarily factual, and the evidence wasn't necessarily there, as he never once stated what scientist he was referring to when speaking. Going in, I had never really cared much about the evidence that was presented. I always accepted it openly, or I just believed in the credibility of the person. After this course, I've become much better at being able to detect bullshit that people may spew. I no longer believe things that people that may have seen as credible. In my second debate, this idea of credibility played a huge role in my demise, as in my debate, Arun asked me to go further into detail about one of my points that I made, and I had frozen and could not be able to answer his question. Therefore, my credibility was completely diminished and led to the demise of that whole debate. Another thing that I wanted to bring up Al Gore was that he did credible that I learned from was his appeal to the audience. This idea of drawing towards the audience's emotions is brilliant, as even I had fallen for his words. He brought up the idea of polar bears and ice caps melting and skyrocketing charts that he constantly showed. The polar bears are what really sunk into me. I thought, oh no, what happened to the polar bears? And this is something that I wanted to implement going forward with my debates, and it's something that I've learned throughout this class. As for the journal aspect, implementing these into my knowledge was super essential. It allowed me to explore some of the topics further into detail. It made me do tasks that I would not normally do. It also made me more aware of things that I said or believed. When writing down my observations, I realized how many things I believed to be true that were not. It made me feel a bit silly, but it added to my bullshit detector and made it better. It made me more aware of the situations around me and the conversations and evidence that people would cite. However, this quarter was great, and I learned a lot from this course, and my bullshit detector has been further improved.
Thank you. Quick question for you. I didn't hear much about how Passmore insights. Just leave it down, or if you, just leave it down. You can't get it up. Passmore.
Oh, his critical thinking? I didn't really believe in it much. He stressed the idea of teachers not passing down critical thinking to their students, which I thought you can't really judge a few teachers based off of what they assumed. You need to ask questions. He's not taking into account different aspects like cultural differences and the thought of disrespect that some cultures may have with it, and that's what I thought.
And Milgram.
Oh, the authority thing. I referred to that when I was speaking in the beginning for cultural differences, where you're not allowed to ask much questions, and
Okay, that's enough. Thank you. Derek Taylor, and I apologize for keeping you at bay, but I'm vulnerable to people's cough.
It's just a dry cough, but it's all good.
I don't trust dry cough. You got any Lysol you can spray on me? Okay, Mr. Derek Taylor.
This is good. I'm good.
No, we're not good. You make it good though. We're almost good. Take a step that way, please. Yeah. Shoot. I really missed it. Mr. Taylor, talk to me about critical thinking,
Perfect.
etc.
So, good morning. I'm Derek Taylor.
Hi, Derek.
Hello. So, for I want to open talking about one of the first journals I did, which was, I believe it was for under the prompt, given argument without evidence or something along those lines, and I wrote about my friends just because a lot of the nature of our friendship, just with my group of friends, is just debating and sharing our opinions with things and going back and forth. Why does this person feel this way about something? Just interchanging ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And I just would always lose these, and I didn't, I wasn't able to convince my friends. No one's on my side. I'm always fighting by myself. So I'm just well, what am I doing wrong? And I now retrospectively that I've taken the class, I'm pretty sure a lot of it's due to my poor bullshit detector. So I'll talk about that more at the end, but that was a big thing going in.
Okay.
So to tie into, which I think is a big lead into critical thinking, and critical thinking to me, I defined it in here as the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment.
Yeah.
And critical thinking is what we use to advance our world and continue innovate each day. It challenges accepted truths and asks a tough question to what has kept our society progressive. I think the institution of education is founded on critical thinking. We need it to go on. And the desire to go further and more in depth into concepts requires critical thinking. Offering critiques makes way for improvement of commonly accepted ways of doing things, and having a mindset that embraces this critical thinking is indicative of constant growth and contributing to larger scale learning, which I definitely agree with. And to me, the converse of critical thinking would be something like complacency, just being fine with not learning more, just set in the ways, accepting things as truth as you're taught to them. I think when looking back at the Milgram experiment, a lot of I think the results you see are either people exercising a challenge or some sort of a resistance towards accepting these truths, or just complete complacency and being set in these ways. So I think a way to move out of complacency is to someone mentioned it earlier, by self-evaluation and reflectivity of the self, I think is a huge one. And I think that taking this class sharpened my skills with analysis, evaluation, judgment, critical thinking, and of course argumentation. It's just deepened my critical thinking abilities and how to reflect and challenge the arguments I'm presented with, and also the evidence. For Pastor Moore's on teaching to be, critical, he argues that, or one of the claims he makes is that critical thinking begins in the classroom. This is something that I didn't necessarily agree with first starting out, because I think critical thinking starts way before the classroom. When you're a baby and you're asking why this, why that, that begs to some critical thinking that I think is important to acknowledge outside of academic spaces, just because you don't want to confine critical thinking into one thing that kind of hints at the complacency that I was talking about. Another thing Pastor Moore states is that if one is restricted from critical thinking, they might not be able to make decisions and reach full understanding. This is a claim that I do agree with. Without critical thinking, being able to have just logic and reason and basic foundations of argumentation, they're kind of affected and hindered. There's one more thing about Pastor Moore, but I'll skip it due to time. I just want to say that in the class I've learned how to be as critical as possible through analysis and observation, coming in as like a newbie to debates, not doing briefs before, not debating before, like all of this was new information. I think like taking a critical standpoint on it instead of just accepting it as what it is definitely helped me like get the most out of the experience. And then I just want to say that my BS detector I think has grown a lot over the past quarter, I think due to like a lot of these things.
Is that 5 minutes?
4.
Oh. Great. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Derek, you nearly covered all the bases, so thank you for trying to get to all of them. Okay, Serena, followed by Elsie. Derek, can I tell you to open a window? It feels stuffy in here.
Just one?
No, how about 2? So the bottom. Yeah, pull it toward you. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Praise the Lord. Thank you. Serena. Okay, thank you, Serena. You're a tall girl. Over there, that way, yeah. Let's try this. Oh, shit. Sorry. Let me try this. Yeah, that solves. Go that way. Yeah. Serena. Serena, talk to me about critical thinking and its 5 aspects, or 4 or 6. Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Serena.
Hi, Serena.
And to start off, I guess this is my 3rd and last class that I have taken with you, Professor Miller. Thank you. Wait, actually, my last course at UCLA too. So as an individual who has taken many public speaking courses, both at community college and at UCLA, I would consider myself pretty knowledgeable about what there is to know about argumentation. This is not to say that I'm an expert by any means, but I do think I have a bit of experience in public speaking. But after taking this particular course, I found myself walking away with concepts that I had already known, but now with a different perspective of them. So today, the 3 lessons that I will be talking about is first, the importance of questioning information presented to us. Second, the importance of checking our sources. And third, the importance of criticism. And this is significant because these 3 lessons are the fundamentals of debate and shape the way we view and understand argumentation. So when I first took this class, like everyone else, I thought that global warming was obviously occurring at an alarming rate because that was the information we were told. And not only did I believe this to be true, but I felt that anyone who disagreed was probably uninformed. But the ironic part, exactly, but the ironic part was that I guess I was the one that was uninformed since I was just taking all this information at face value. And so through this class and through my personal debate, I, for one, am glad to be assigned on the negative side because it forced me to attack and defend an argument that I had previously believed to be true. And through finding counter-arguments for points that I commonly accepted as truth, it allowed me to change my perspective and realize how easily I accepted things to be true. Second, through this course, I also learned the importance of checking my sources. So for example, through the Milgram Experiment, I could see how important it was how people just simply obey their authorities. So this experiment showed me how people simply obeyed instructions simply because it was provided by an authority figure. In the same way, I saw it true in my life. When doing the Journal 12 assignment, we were required to notice authorities in our lives and record our reactions to them. And so for once, I found myself questioning information that my professors and my friends and my RA was telling me. Before, I would just simply agree and follow all instructions and information provided. But this assignment and this course showed me the importance of sometimes needing to even question our authorities.
Excellent.
And finally, I also learned about the importance of criticism. So in the article on Teaching to be Critical by John Passmore, he says that to encourage a critical spirit, a teacher has to develop in his pupils an enthusiasm for the give and take of critical discussion. And so by giving the audience time to provide constructive criticism after the debate, I was able to learn how to engage in critical discussion. And so during this feedback portion of the debate, I could learn more about what swayed the audience to vote the way they did. I could learn about how to better develop my public speaking and research skills. And this engagement in critical discussion actually showed me how to think critically each time. So as for the BS detector, it has definitely developed over the course of the quarter. Rather than taking things at face value, I now see the importance of really looking into all the facts, statistics, and sources that are presented to me. So similar to the examples provided through my debate and through the journals, I can see instances in which I would have beforehand easily accepted everything to be the truth, but after this course I can see that and recognize several times throughout my day-to-day life in which I notice an authority figure or a peer utilizing a false generalization or a fallacy. And so to expand my use of the BS detector, I know that I shouldn't grow complacent with the information that I previously accepted to be true. And even when society has accepted something to be true, such as global warming, it is important that we continuously fact check. Thank you.
Thank you. Serena, I'd like to ask you a question, a serious question, because I respect you a great deal and you've been a nice student throughout the years. How can we improve this course, or how can I improve as an instructor? What do you think? What could we do better?
I was expecting a question about like Passmore. I think that, that is a good question.
Well, give me a good answer.
I would say that I think we spend. This is good. Oh, Professor, you put me on the spot for this one. This is really a hard question. I think the workload could tend to be a little bit much, and so I find myself really like spending a lot of times on journals and whatnot, and I think that if the workload was a little bit alleviated, I could spend more time rewatching my evaluations, because I notice like when I do my week-to-week schedule that I spend a lot of time doing like journals and recording instances, and that takes up a lot of time, and I feel like my focus is more on the assignments than it is on public speaking. And a lot of students take this course to have better public speaking skills. So I think that if
So
the
you
workload
need
is
to
light
rewatch your videos more?
Yeah, I think I would, if the workload was lighter, I would have spent more time like watching the complete video that you send out, stuff like that.
Okay, yeah, I know it's a ball breaker.
Yeah.
Pardon my French, yeah.
But it's a great course. I love
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Thank you. Elsie! Camarillo, is she here in the house? Where's your hat?
Also, Professor, I have to be somewhere at 12, so I have to leave now.
Okay, well, it was nice knowing you. Have a good life. Don't change. Okay. Half step this way. That wasn't a half step. Correctly, yeah, good. What does your sweater say?
Blansigar is just the brand.
What?
Blansigar is the brand.
Is that a good brand?
Yeah, I like this brand.
Great. Okay, good. Okay, Elsie, tell me all. Do I have your thing? Yeah.
Yes.
Tell me all about critical thinking and what you learned.
So after I watched Milgram Experiment, it reflected to myself. Like in the experiment, children learn from what their authority, parents, and professors said. So I grew up in the forced military family. What I learned is just follow the strict rules and listen what they say. You can't have your own thoughts, and you have to accept the military thoughts and what they believe.
In the article Teaching to be Critical, John Passmore asks whether being critical is a habit, a skill, a subject area, or an attribute of mind and character. Although certain habits, logical procedures, and attention to subjects are required for being critical, Passmore argues that to call a person critical is to avoid certain bias, or just accept our own reasoning, or simply accept others' opinions. Critical thinking is the ability to analyze the way we think and present evidence for our ideas, rather than simply accepting our personal reasoning as sufficient proof. I can gain numerous benefits from mastering critical thinking skills, such as better control of my own learning and empathy for other points of view. I'm going to talk about what I learned from journals and value debate, and also how the journal and the value debate expand and involve my BS detector. The journal assigned to us this quarter were really helpful in understanding critical thinking. For example, when I was involving in purposefully questioning someone's evidence, my friend indicated that marijuana should be legalized, and she provides lots of evidence to show how harmful the marijuana is. From my reasoning, I think marijuana should be legalized too. But as I started to think critically, I also think that using marijuana as a medical prescription, it can be a safe and useful sleep aid, and has a very low risk of abuse. In my value debate, although I don't think global warming is catastrophic, my side is to show how catastrophic the global warming is. After I did research on climate change, I realized that I shouldn't have bias on climate change. And rather than simply accepting my own reasoning, I need to think critically. And thinking critically should not be assumed to be synonymous with criticizing. Once I learned to think critically, I criticize an argument, but my thinking will be thoughtfully reasoned consideration in the concept of critical thinking. The value debate and journals help me a lot in involving and expanding my BS detector. Rather than simply accepting our own reasoning as sufficient proof, we have to have the ability to analyze the way we think, and which means think critically. So in summary, what I learned from this class is that in order to think critically, we should avoid certain bias and doing our own research better than follow others' opinions, and or simply accepting our own reasoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Elsie. Very good job. You covered the landscape. Okay. I am going to stop this marathon at 3:22.